Chapter 37, Blunderbuss. Chapter 37, Blunderbuss. The world darkened before Shen Zichuan. He was now much closer to Xiao Qie. He heard Xiao Qie say, "So it's really the smell on me. This is way too pungent." Shen Zichuan switched the topic and asked, "Did you just add the blunderbuss one to the Imperial Army's arsenal?" Bronze blunderbuss. Xiao Qie moved his finger close to the tip of Shen Zichuan's nose to let him take a sniff. "It was mixed together with the scent on you, so I couldn't tell it apart for a moment." "There's no scent on me." The tip of Shen Zichuan's nose twitched slightly. He said, "Did you raid the 8th Great Training Division's military armory?" The blunderbuss was restricted by the Imperial Court. After it was improved from the original bamboo tube design into the bronze version, it became the equipment of the 8 Great Training Division's Chunquan Battalion. This weapon was lethal, but it was not easy to control. The projectiles had limited range, and it took time to load. However, the 8 Great Training Division's job was to guard Kudu, and it was mostly street fights when they came to blows with others. Not only was it hard to bring out the firearm's full potential to do what it was meant to do, but it also became a burden. That was why the 8 Great Training Divisions did not popularize the use of it and chose to set it aside instead. It was only during the yearly drills at the military drill grounds that they would take it out to use. It might not suit the 8 Great Training Divisions, but it was very suitable for Li Bei's armored cavalry. The armored cavalry of Li Bei were heavy cavalry, with a very small number of infantry and light cavalry. They favored straight-on assault that hit like a surge of monstrous wave. In the early years, Dazhou set up a cavalry garrison at Luoxia Pass. In order to deal with the fast speed of the Biancha cavalry, they spared no expense to purchase horses and attempted to build Dazhou's very own cavalry's horse ranch. However, all the horses sent by the Biancha tribes were often inferior steeds in their own tribes, while their own horses were true brave horses who had fought against packs of wild wolves at the foot of the Hongyan Mountains. Paired up with machetes and sturdy warriors, they were invincible everywhere they went. It was because of this that Xiao Fangxiu established the Li Bei armored cavalry with heavily armored men and horses. They formed a living metal wall in the northwest, so that there was no way the Biancha cavalry's storm-like assaults could pass through this steel wall. The northwest was a vast, boundless expanse of grassland. If the Li Bei armored cavalry could be equipped with blunderbusses, then the long-ranged attacks of the Biancha cavalry would turn into Li Bei's armored cavalry's advantage. Long-ranged attacks could leave enough time for the blunderbusses to be charged. By the time the cavalry arrived before them, they would be within the shooting range of the blunderbusses. To Li Bei, this simply served to boost their power and strength, much like a tiger that had been given wings. Even with Shi Guan removed, the 8 Great Training Divisions are still the 8 Great Training Divisions. Xiao Qie took a step closer and pushed Shen Zichuan forward with his chest. "There's no raiding to talk of for a military armory. It's just a change of master. Don't worry about it. I'm only just taking it to play with." Shen Zichuan walked a few steps as if he really did not care and said, "Can you just lift the blanket away and walk? The days are short and the nights are long. Why not hold a candle for a leisure walk?" Xiao Qie smiled. "Want to play with me too?" Since it was not obtained in an open and above-board manner, then it'd be safer to hide it. Shen Zichuan lifted the blanket and made his way out. "Making your way through Kudu while reeking of gunpowder all over. You're lucky it's the middle of the night. It doesn't matter even if it's during the day." Xiao Qie clamped the pillow under his arm and raised one arm high to prop up the blanket as he walked. He swept his eyes across the veranda's eaves. "Who doesn't know that I, Xiao Suan, love to play? Even if I hold a blunderbuss, it's also to shoot birds." He emphasized the word birds, causing Ding Tao and Gu Jin, who were sprawled above, to shudder in unison. After entering the room, Xiao Qie threw the blanket and pillow onto his bed, kicked off his boots in 2 or 3 tries, and stepped across the woolen rug with the intent to take a bath. He had already taken off half of his clothes when he extended his upper body out from behind the curtain. "Have you taken your bath?" Shen Zichuan rinsed his mouth and said, "Yeah." So Shao Qie took a bath himself, moving fast. When he stepped out while wiping the water on his nape, he saw that Shen Zichuan had already lain down with his back towards him. Shao Qie looked at the nape Shen Zichuan had covered up tightly, then wiped his hair hastily and blew out the lamp. Songji loves Liaoning at Kangji. Net Shen Zichuan listened as Shao Qie sat on the couch and opened a box to look for something. "Lanzhao." Shao Qie closed the box and asked, "Are you asleep?" Shen Zichuan answered without feelings, "Yeah." The Court of Judicial Review summoned many physicians today. Yet they did not dare to alert the Imperial Academy of Medicine. Shao Qie said, "What did you do to Ji Lei?" Shen Zichuan asked, "Do you want to listen to ghost stories late at night? They are going to interrogate the Imperial prison guards tomorrow morning." Shao Qie said, "Just going through the motions." Shen Zichuan did not know whether Hai Liangyi could tolerate such a thing, but he knew Xue Xiuzhua could. Xue Xiuzhua had already gotten the confession he wanted, so Ji Lei was now useless. This mess was created by Shen Zichuan, but never once had he thought to clean up the mess, because Xue Xiuzhua and Shi Hongxian had to clean it up. When Shen Zichuan thought to this point, he said, "I've been towing the line. Even if they investigate." Shao Qie lay down, then suddenly sat up and said, "Wipe my hair." Shen Zichuan closed his eyes and pretended to sleep. Shao Qie said, "Stop pretending to sleep. Hurry up." Shao Qie said, "Lanzhao." Shao Qie said, "Shen Lanzhao." The bed suddenly sank. Shen Zichuan opened his eyes in shock. His blanket had already been lifted away. Shao Qie squeezed in behind him and nuzzled his dripping wet head on Shen Zichuan's back, instantly soaking it. Pulling his blanket, Shen Zichuan said, "Xiao'er, you 3 years old?" "More or less." Shao Qie replied lazily, "Didn't you already fall asleep? Please continue." The more Shen Zichuan slept, the wetter he became. That cold mop of hair stuck to him. And following in its wake was Shao Qie, who smelled the same as the scent on the handkerchief last night. Shen Zichuan opened his eyes and said, "My clothes are wet." No one replied. Shen Zichuan said, "Stop pretending to sleep." Shen Zichuan said, "Xiao'er." Shen Zichuan propped himself up with his arms and said in the darkness, "Shao Sun, you're a jerk." The jerk handed him a dry handkerchief out of consideration, then turned his back to him and waited. On the rooftop, Ding Tao pulled back his hands and said, "It's so cold even on snowy days. I'm afraid we won't be having an easy time this winter." Gu Jin handed him the wine bag and rubbed his hands and said, "We have kept watch for 2 nights. There should be a shift change tomorrow morning." Ding Tao took a sip of the wine, which warmed him up a little. Folding his arms up into his sleeves, he lay down too and said as he looked at the night sky, "Nothing's happening tonight either. The task is arduous, and the road is long." Gu Jin covered the wine bag. His ears suddenly twitched, and he turned over to lie on his stomach. His eyes moved back and forth in the boundless darkness like a falcon. A subtle sound of snow being trodden on rang out in the wind. Gu Jin acted decisively and flipped over his hand to toss out a flying blade. He whispered, "The northwest corner." Ding Tao suddenly leaped up, flew across the rooftop, and hacked at the darkness with a lightning move of his hand. The jet-black robe in the night dodged his blow smoothly. Like a ghost, the man concealed himself into the shadows and attempted to flee. A lithe Ding Tao fell over to hang upside down from the eaves. He did not expect steel needles to come for him right in the face. Using the shaft of the brush in his hand, he struck away the needles with a thwack. When he took a look again, the person had already made his escape. Ding Tao landed soundlessly on the ground. His qigong was so outstanding that he did not leave any footprints when he landed on this thin snow. Gu Jin surveyed the area from the rooftop and said, "Excellent martial arts. To think he could escape my eyes." Tao Zi, 5. Could you tell who it was? Ding Tao picked the steel needles from the veranda and pinched them between his fingertips to scrutinize. In just a short instant, he had already learned a lot. He said, "It's thin as hair and dipped in snake venom. It's not a product of kudu, but a foreign gimmick imported by the Yongquan harbor in the 13 cities of Jueshi. His qigong is good, and his ability to mask his breathing is exceptional. Although he did not carry a broadsword with him, he's likely from the Imperial bodyguard." He carefully put the steel needles into his own bamboo tube and somersaulted back on to the rooftop. "The Imperial bodyguards have removed a bunch of officials from office. Skilled men of 4th grade 6 and below are few and far between," Gu Jin said. "Who would come to our prince's manor at this moment to scout around? It's hard to say." Ding Tao touched his chest with trepidation. "He almost stabbed my book." Gu Jin drank his wine, lost in thoughts. Ding Tao sat cross-legged and began to say in a hushed tone, "This book has been with me for many years. What's more, it was a reward from the hereditary prince's consort. Even when I went to fight those Bianchabaldies, it had never been stabbed before. What a close call. It's really too close of a call. There are still many things written in it. Do you know? My father's own book was stolen when someone slit his throat. Oh my God. Recorded in it are all major stuff. Back then, I chased after the book until I almost died. Jinji, I'm telling you. A man should always keep a journal because they will become forgetful when they grow old. Like you. You drink so much wine all day that before the age of 40, you will probably forget how much money you have been squirreling away. Why not you tell me, and I'll write it down and remember it for you." Gu Jin stuffed cotton into his ears and began to meditate. The next day, Shun Zichuan was the first to wake up. He did not sleep. With Xiao Qie crowding behind him, both of them had been up to their neck pulling the blanket back and forth in the night. Besides, Shun Zichuan could not sleep with such a hulk of a person beside him. Xiao Qie was lying still in a pretty sound sleep while hugging the pillow. Shun Zichuan waited for him to wake. But he ended up waiting for something else instead. That erected portion pressed against his buttock, brimming with vigor. Hot and obvious. The temperature on the bed rose. He did not know if Xiao Qie was awoken by the heat or by the hardness. In any case, he cussed in a hoarse voice and sat up in one smooth movement. Songji loves Liaoning at Kangji. Net Xiao Qie tossed the pillow aside. He cast Shun Zichuan a look and saw that Shun Zichuan was also looking at him. He grabbed at his own hair and reached out a hand to cover Shun Zichuan with the blanket to forbid the latter to look. Then he got out of bed and headed straight into the pool without even wearing his shoes. Chen Yang was waiting outside listening to signs of activities when he saw Shun Zichuan stepped out. He did not know what to say as both men faced each other. But Shun Zichuan simply pointed naturally in the direction of the bath hall and walked away. By the time Xiao Qie emerged, he was already clear-headed. He ate a little of his breakfast and listened as Chen Yang told him about the intruder last night. Imperial bodyguards? Xiao Qie thought for a moment and said, "He didn't come for me. He should be someone here to keep an eye on Shun Lanzhao. Then, he's the Empress Dowager's man." Chen Yang said, "But manpower is scarce now. How would there still be such skilled men in the Imperial bodyguards?" "The waters of the Imperial bodyguards run deep." Xiao Qie stood up. "I'll head out for morning court. 7 We'll talk again when I return." At the end of the court session, Li Jianheng, holding the hand warmer, 8 sat in Mingli Hall and watched as the various officials split up into both sides. He asked apprehensively, "So the verdict has been passed?" Shuexiuzhua kneeled and said, "To reply, Your Majesty, Ji Lei had made a full confession regarding his intent to rebel at the Nanlin hunting grounds. The evidence against him is now conclusive. The Court of Judicial Review worked through the night last night to straighten out the confession, and it has been submitted to Your Majesty by Secretariat Elder High. In the half months before and after the Hua faction case, The 3 judicial offices have repeatedly conducted joint trials. The 2 vice-commanders and 4 assistant commanders of the imperial bodyguards headed by Ji Lei are all sentenced to immediate execution by decapitation, 9 while the Judge 10 and accompanying battalion commanders at the Nanlin hunting grounds are all sentenced to prison to await execution. 11 As long as the sentence has been passed, it's all good. Li Jianheng said. You have worked hard, Secretariat Elder. It's inadvisable to stand for long. Men, bring him a seat. After Hai Liangyi sat down, Li Jianheng continued, It's truly abhorrent of the Hua clan to collude with the eunuchs and imperial bodyguards to plot a rebellion. Pan Rugi, as the brush-holding director of the Directorate of Ceremonial, is greedy for power and wealth. He's wicked beyond redemption. This person must not be held in custody to await execution. He should be beheaded right away. The words Secretariat Elder has previously said to me gave me sleepless nights. After thinking about it for a long time, I've decided to work hard for the prosperity of the state from now on. Hai Liangyi immediately rose to bow again. Li Jianheng quickly raised his hands and said, Sit, Secretariat Elder, please sit. There are now many matters that I'll need the Secretariat Elder's advice on. In the future, I hope that everyone will work as one to assist me. If you have something to say, you can boldly speak your mind here. Xue Xiuzhua looked up in surprise, but his expression remained neutral. He kneeled in unison with the various officials on his left and right and commended the decision. Li Jianheng excitedly motioned for everyone to get up. After saying a little more, he dismissed them and invited only Secretariat Elder Hai to stay and have a meal with him. Xiao Qia happened to be with Xue Xiuzhua when he came out. Xue Xiuzhua said, I wonder what the Viceroy said to His Majesty. To think His Majesty would be willing to show such respect to the wise. His Majesty is young and strong. This is just the time for him to show his might. Even if I said nothing, he would still do this on his own accord. Xiao Qia said, The Court of Judicial Review has been busy these days. It has been hard on Your Excellency Yanqing. One would naturally concern himself with all matters pertaining to his post. It's my duty. As Xue Xiuzhua spoke, he looked at Xiao Qia and said with a smile, I heard that the Viceroy has been diligently heading to Mount Feng these 2 days. Is there anything fun there? Xiao Qia smiled too and replied, The first snow on Mount Feng is unparalleled in the world, and several deers have been sighted recently. I'm thinking of hunting a few rounds for fun. If you are free, would you like to go and have a look together? Xue Xiuzhua gave a light wave of his hand and said, I am just a weak scholar. What would I know about hunting? I wouldn't want to dampen the Viceroy's spirits. Both men parted ways at the entrance of the palace. As Xiao Qia watched him recede into the distance, his earlier smile waned. Chen Yang was waiting by the horse carriage. He waited until Xiao Qia arrived before he lifted the curtain for him and said at the same time, Viceroy, the Venerable Shifu has already left for Kudu. Xiao Qia nodded. Chen Yang hesitated for a moment, then continued, Our tale in the Court of Judicial Review has brought back word that Ji Lei's dead. Xiao Qia asked, How did he die? Chen Yang raised his hands to gesture as he kept his voice down to say, He was skinned until he looked neither human nor ghost. He was on the verge of dying last night, but Xue Xiuzhua kept him hanging onto his last breath until the confession was presented to His Majesty. Only then did he let him breathe his last. Xiao Qia sat down in silence. Chen Yang said, Ji Lei interrogated Shen Zichuan in the imperial prison 5 years ago and got Feng Quan to humiliate him in public with donkey roast. Now, Shen Zichuan has returned tit for tat and also turned Ji Lei into. This person's vindictive nature is evident. Viceroy, there's animosity between him and us too. It's too dangerous to let him stay with us now. Xiao Qia twirled the thumb ring on his thumb and did not reply. Chapter 38. Military Discipline. Chapter 38. Military Discipline. The snow fell for 3 or 4 days. Xiao Qie became lazy to the point he hardly went to the military drill grounds. He had recently made the acquaintance of several Longyu merchants, won and purchased some valuables such as pearls imported from Yongquan Harbor and jasper produced from Huzhou, all of which were exquisite items. Li Jianheng was very diligent now. No matter how cold the weather was, he would attend court sessions as usual and ask Hai Liangyi to give lectures every day. When he saw Xiao Qie neglecting his tasks, he would also exhort him a word or two. He seemed as if he genuinely had a change of heart. Xiao Qie was glad to see the change in him. He hunted 2 deers from Mount Feng and presented them to the palace. Frightened by the donkey roast the last time, Li Jianheng kept wild creatures at arm's length and bestowed the deers to Hai Liangyi instead. It was soon to be the end of the year, when the sacrificial ceremony too and officials' banquet were major events. The 6 ministries and 24 yamen of the imperial palace were all up to their neck in work. The directorate of ceremonial lacked manpower, and there were many matters that they could not get a grasp on, so they still had to ask Li Jianheng. Li Jianheng was baffled when it came to these matters too, so he had to trouble Hai Liangyi and the Ministry of Rites to decide every time. It began to grow busy in Kudu. When Li Jianheng saw that Xiao Qie had nothing to do, he gave him an important job and handed him the task of reviewing the 8th Great Training Division's roster. This way, Kudu's patrols and defenses fell completely into Xiao Qie's hands. Xiao Qie could not turn it down, so he had no choice but to start busying around. Shun Zichuan followed Xiao Qie as the latter bustled about. Consequently, that made it inevitable for him to run into the imperial army. Tantai, who had yet to remove his blades after his patrol ended this one day. When he returned to the office, he saw Shun Zichuan standing outside. He rubbed his frozen, scarred face and strode over. Shun Zichuan turned his head and watched as Tantai, who moved menacingly towards him. Shun the 8th. Tantai, who stopped in his tracks and said coldly to Shun Zichuan, "Shin Wei is your old man, right? Songji loves Lianin at Kangji." Net Shun Zichuan asked, "Are you looking for my old man or for me?" "Of course I'm looking for you. Shun Wei has already been fucking burned to ashes." Tantai, who paced around Shun Zichuan and said, "Your days in Kudu are still comfortable. Look at this figure. It's comparable to the courtesans in Donglong Street. The pampered kind with an appetite for food and wine." Hearing his tone, Shun Zichuan knew that he did not come with good intentions. Chen Yang said nothing beside him, while the imperial army in the courtyard all craned their necks to watch the show. Tantai, who continued, "Perky ass and a slender willow waist. Rosy peach blossom cheeks and foxy eyes. In Shangyun Villa, you'd be a first-class top courtesan material. Why are you running around in the wind and snow with our viceroy instead of living the good life?" Tantai, who stood fixed in place and stared daggers at Shun Zichuan. He continued, "It was only because Shun Wei licked the hooves of the Libei armored cavalry horses 5 years ago that the 6 prefectures of Zhongbua did not turn into manure pits for the Biancha 12 tribes' horses. And now you are also learning from your old man. Which part of our viceroy are you going to lick? The brothel prostitutes are all great talents skilled in a certain technique once they let down the bed curtains. What skill do you have that makes you worthy of standing together today with all the men who have fought battles?" Shun Zichuan said with a smile, "If I'm not worthy, then is the vice-commander going to revoke my waist token and drive me out of the courtyard? Why would I want to waste that much effort?" Tantai, who said, "You are the dog at our imperial army's doors. Even a kick is an honor to you. It's also on account of the viceroy that I'm here saying a few words to you. Since you have become another man's thing, then you must have the cognizance of being an object. I hung up the imperial bodyguard's waist token on the Son of Heaven's 3 orders. And that means I'm here on official business. How is that being someone else's thing?" Shun Zichuan said, "If I'm the imperial army's dog, then all of you sirs aren't that different either. We are all men receiving a salary from the imperial court walking around Kudu. If there is any awareness to be had, then everyone must work with one mind and heart to be enlightened. Tantai, whose tiger-like eyes widened in a stare as he held up his twin blades and fumed, "You the same as us? Disrespectful Shin dog. Back then, I was the senior battalion commander of the Dengzhou garrison troops of Zhongdu." He strode a sudden step forward and seethed with hatred. "At that time, when Chasha River was defeated, my brothers were in the Chasha sinkhole. Do you know what a sight that was? Men shot alive with arrows until they turned into hedgehogs. 40,000 men buried together in the sinkhole. 40,000 men." Shen Zichuan's expression remained unchanged. Tantai, who said, "My old man and mother were in Dengzhou too. The Biancha cavalry came attacking, and that traitor Shen fled, abandoning all the old, weak, women, and children in Dengzhou like my parents to the Biancha cavalry. They massacred the cities one after another. My younger sister was dragged by the Biancha cavalry for 2 li 4 before she was raped and slaughtered at the city gates. But you are living such a carefree life with no need to worry about the necessities. Just stick out your ass for others to fuck, and any sin you are guilty of can be pardoned." The cold wind blew in the courtyard. Chen Yang saw that the situation was getting out of hand and wanted to stop him, but it was already too late. Tantai, who lifted Shen Zichuan by the collar and said, infuriated, "How dare you talk back when I'm lecturing you today? You are all young masters used to a life of luxury. How would you know exactly how many people died in that battle? How would you know there are still countless people who have starved to death in Zhongbua even in this day and age? How's life in Kudu, huh? You sleep well, live well, and there are always people absolving you of sin one after another. Then what about those people in Zhongbua who have died? Who is going to be held accountable for their deaths?" Shen Zichuan grabbed hold of Tantai, whose arm, and suddenly flung him over to the ground. It was such a shocking move that everyone around them retreated in unison. Shen Zichuan rubbed 2 handfuls of snow and looked at Tantai. "Who?" he said. "Who? Ask your own people. It took an entire month for the Biancha cavalry to enter our territory and moved along the banks of Chasha River to Dengzhou. When Shen Wei cowered back from battle, you iron-willed, valiant men should have broken his neck and dispatched troops to fortify defenses." Shen Zichuan stood up. "Even if you humiliate me and hate me, it's no skin off my nose. This world calls for repaying a debt of blood with blood. Killing me is thus considered enforcing justice on behalf of heaven and appeasing public wrath." He spat at Tantai, who and smiled maliciously. "What a fucking load of crap. The one who massacred the cities is the Biancha cavalry. They are also the one who killed those 40,000 soldiers. You want to screw me, Shen Zichuan, then get your ass straight first and wash the Biancha cavalry's piss off your head. My life is lowly, and my death is not to be regretted. But will my death write off the Biancha cavalry's debts?" Tantai, who said, "Don't you fucking try to absolve yourself from guilt. Wasn't your old man the one who let the Biancha cavalry into the territories? Then kill me." Shen Zichuan raised a finger to make a slashing motion across his neck. "Please hurry and kill me. Kill me, and the Shen traitor's bloodline will be severed." Tantai, who suddenly stood up, pulled out his twin blades, and pounced on Shen Zichuan. Having just woken up, Ding Tao had only just strode through the door when he saw what was happening. Alarmed, he shouted, "Lao Hu, 5 don't hurt him. I have to keep watch on him." Tantai, who was already beyond listening. He slashed out with his twin blades and sent the wind whistling. Ding Tao leaped 3 feet 6 high, intending to charge in, but Gu Jin lifted him by his back collar to stop him from going. "Lao Hu's entire family died in Zhongbua," Gu Jin said. "You can't expect him to let Shen Zichuan off." Ding Tao said, "But wasn't the culprit Shen Wei? What does it have to do with Shen Zichuan?" Gu Jin hesitated for a moment, but did not continue the conversation. Tantai, whose blade sliced the air before Shen Zichuan's face, and Shen Zichuan spun around to kick his blade-holding wrist askew. As soon as Tantai, whose arm went numb, he hurled his blade out. Right at that time, the curtain to the office was lifted. Yang Zongji, the vice minister of the Ministry of War, stared at the blade with widened eyes as it came hurtling towards him. Chen Yang instantly raised his arm in an attempt to grab the hilt. But who would expect Xiao Qie to be faster? With a swing of his sheath, he struck the blade down into the snow. The steel blade stabbed into the ground with force so violent it shocked the entire courtyard of Imperial Army into kneeling. They said in unison, "Viceroy, please pardon our offense." Ignoring them, Xiao Qie hung his blade back and raised his hand to lift the curtain for Yang Zongji. With an apologetic smile, he said, "I failed to discipline my subordinates and have thus caused alarm to Vice Minister Yang. How would Yang Zongji dare to linger?" After concurring awkwardly for a couple of times, he hurried out of the courtyard, got into his horse carriage, and slipped away without even wanting anyone to see him off. Once Xiao Qie was done seeing him off, he turned back to look at the entire courtyard of kneeling men. Knowing that he was in the wrong, Chen Yang hastened to say, "Viceroy, it's this subordinate who has been negligent in my supervision and didn't. You've watched the show long enough." As Xiao Qie spoke, Meng landed on his shoulder. He took out some white meat and fed it to the gerfalcon, saying only, "Zhao Hui wouldn't do such a thing." Chen Yang's face turned white. Xiao Qie did not reprove Chen Yang as he stood before the others, because Chen Yang was his chief of guards and his trusted aide. He could not give Chen Yang a slap in the face right under the watchful eyes of the men, since that would make him lose his standing among his Imperial Army brothers and make him unable to hold his head up before them. But these words of his cut Chen Yang's heart the deepest. Chen Yang and Zhao Hui were both men with good potential that Xiao Fengshu selected himself. Zhao Hui was calm and steady, and his meritorious military deeds were innumerable as he followed under Xiao Jiming's command. He was a deputy general whom few would dare to show displeasure to when he came to Kudu. Meanwhile, Chen Yang had remained behind in the Libei Prince Manor until he finally followed Xiao Qie 5 years ago. He was prudent, and he was most fearful of others saying that he was inferior to Zhao Hui. This was a contest between them brothers of the same clan. And Xiao Qie's words today not only gave him a wake-up call, but also made him extremely ashamed. When I took over as the viceroy 5 years ago, it was said that the Imperial Army was all a bunch of rotten ruffians who gave scant regard to military discipline and rules, and who held the viceroy in contempt. Xiao Qie stroked Meng and said, "I can't lead these kinds of soldiers. If you want to remain in the Imperial Army, either you buck up and abide by the rules, or you pack up and scram right now." Tantai, whose chest heaved as he said indignantly, "It's as what the viceroy said. We have all listened to you in the past. But what is he? Can he even be called a soldier? I'm appointed the vice commander, and I'm several grades higher than him. Was it wrong of me to lecture him? I may feed myself with this job, but no way am I going to bend myself over for someone who sells his ass. The waist token he's hanging on his waist is of the Imperial bodyguards, and now he is on the job as a guard. If you can sit in my position before giving him the attitude, then you'd have proven yourself capable." Xiao Qie lowered his eyes to look at him. "You think you aren't in the wrong?" Tantai, who straightened up his neck and said, "That's right. Songji loves Lianin at Kangji. Net, then why stay on and suffer indignities?" Xiao Qie said, "Leave." Tantai, who suddenly raised his head in disbelief. "For this man, the viceroy wants to remove me from office? There shall be no personal grudges in the Imperial Army. So don't fucking try to play matchmaker. I'm not doing this for anyone." Xiao Qie lowered his voice. "I have the final say in the Imperial Army. Since you can make your own decisions, then why call me viceroy? Strip off this armor and remove these twin steel blades, then you are free to demand repayment for any blood debt you are owed. If you can take him down within 3 moves, I, Xiao Suan, will immediately kowtow to you and acknowledge my mistake. But when you don this armor and hang up the Imperial Army's token on your waist, then you can only obey me. Every one of you here had a great show to watch today. You trample all over my dignity to your great delight. You have backbone. You're gutsy enough. So what's there for us to talk about military discipline? Wouldn't it be much more gratifying for all of you to scram and become the kings of the mountains 7 instead? Everyone lowered their heads and dared not say a word more. Meng finished eating his meat and raised his head high to stare at them. Xiao Qie said, "Don't you usually like to say that I'm a muddle-headed lecher? Then I'll do precisely that today. I'll revoke Tantai, whose waist token, and send him out of the door." The Imperial Army said in unison, "Viceroy, please be appeased." Tantai, who would not admit his mistake. He pulled the waist token off with a trembling hand and said, "As brothers with the Viceroy, I've received the Viceroy's kindness these 5 years, and I'm even willing to lay down my life for the Viceroy. But what wrong am I guilty of today? The Viceroy wants to break my heart and dismiss me from my post because of a pretty man. Fine. I, Tantai Hu, concede defeat." With that, he placed his waist token and helmet together on the ground and kowtowed thrice. Thud, thud, thud to Xiao Qie. Then he rose to his feet and stripped off his armor. Wearing only his inner garment, 8, he looked at Shen Zichuan. "I'll see how long you can survive by seducing those you serve. 9, I will naturally seek vengeance on the Biantia Baldies in the days to come. But you won't be able to run either." Tantai, who wiped his eyes and cupped his fists to everyone around him. "My brothers, we shall meet again." Then he strode a step forward and left for real. Chapter 39, Wolf and Amp, Tiger. Chapter 39, Wolf and Amp, Tiger. A charcoal fire burned in the hall, making the room hot. Chen Yang had already been kneeling for a little less than an hour. Xiao Qie sat at the head seat reading military books. Imperial army generals of all ranks were also kneeling beyond the curtain. It was silent both on the inside and outside. As the saying goes, if the general has yet to have the prestige to speak of, then he should first awe and intimidate to boost his prestige. When Xiao Qie took over the Imperial Army 5 years ago, he had put on an initial show of strength and power upon assuming office. What he wanted was the absolute authority to command this pack of heroes. In these 5 years, he had been fair in meting out rewards and punishments. He never skimped on the money that was meant to be paid out to the Imperial Army. Not only did he not give less, he even spent much more to make up for any deficiency. He was very generous to his subordinates. Yet, that cloak of his was still the same one his eldest sister-in-law had sent over 3 years ago. The autumn hunt enabled the Imperial Army to hold their heads high. It put them in the limelight, overshadowing the 8 great training divisions. For a moment they had the world at their feet. These soldiers, who have been oppressed for a long time in Kudu, used to put on a submissive front before the 8 great training divisions. Now they even dared to boss the 8 great training divisions around. This was not a good sign. Complacency would lead one to get too carried away by success. Xiao Qie needed an opportunity to knock some senses into the Imperial Army. And the Tantai Hu today was it. Chen Yang did not dare to raise his head. Xiao Qie rapped on the table, and Chen Yang immediately got up to refill the tea for Xiao Qie. Once the cup was filled, he kneeled back down again. Xiao Qie never said a word the entire night, so Chen Yang kneeled on the ground all night. Many words, left unsaid, could make one feel more ashamed than if it had been said. Xiao Qie had to attend morning court the next day. After dressing and tidying himself up, he said to Chen Yang, "There's no need to follow me today. Take a break." Chen Yang had kneeled until both his legs were numbed. With his hands on the ground, he kowtowed and said in a hoarse voice, "Master." He had always addressed Xiao Qie as Viceroy. This call came right from the heart. Sure enough, Xiao Qie stopped in his tracks. But still, he did not look back. Chen Yang kowtowed again and said, "I implore Master to punish me." Xiao Qie raised his hand to signal to those waiting upon him to leave. It was only when there was no one else in the hall that he turned aside to look at Chen Yang. If a man has done nothing wrong, then what punishment is there to speak of? The sweat on Chen Yang's forehead dripped past his eyes. This subordinate has realized the errors of his ways, he said. After a long silence, Shao Qie said, "These years, Zhao Hui has followed Dage on war expeditions to the frontier. He has been climbing the ranks. Within 5 years, he should receive his own residence and a conferred title. You are both good men father himself picked out. Why is it that he, Zhao Hui, could have that kind of honor and glory while you, Chen Yang, have to follow and rot away with a hoodlum?" Chen Yang's lips paled. He said, "How would this subordinate dare to think so? The hereditary prince has his own strength. But its master who is my pillar? Zhao Hui and I are both brothers of the same clan. We share weal and woe together. It'd be best if you truly understand this principle." Shao Qie said, "Brothers who fight among themselves and family who draw swords at each other too are all rotten to the core. Outsiders don't even have to make their moves for you to meet your end before them. You followed me and remained in Kudu, leaving all the matters back at home to Zhao Hui to look after. His younger sister married the vice director of the Ministry of Rights, and you are the one who filled in the role of family from her maternal home and backed her during Spring Festival 3 and other festivities. You can contend with will and spirit if you want to make great contributions and accomplish great tasks, but not so when it comes to moral principles. It's having righteous ardor and heroic spirit that makes a good man. What's your fear and hurry to compete with him? Zhao Hui wouldn't do what happened yesterday, because he has Dage's dignity to consider. You are now the chief of the Imperial Army's guards, yet you still need to rely on that bit of trick to inspire confidence in others. For that bit for gratification, you would even let others trample over your master's dignity. Tantai who came from Zhongbua. You know that. But you still swapped him to yesterday's roster so that he could vent his anger and resentment. So what is it, Chen Yang? Have you been following me to fool around to the point that you now have to play games like this to win others over? For this moment of satisfaction, you would not even hesitate to dent your master's dignity. Stung by remorse and self-reproach, Chen Yang lowered his head and said, "I've let master down, you've let yourself down." Shao Qie suddenly said in an indifferent voice, "Come back on rotational duty once you've figured it out. Let Gu Jin follow me these few days." Dazed, Chen Yang kneeled on the ground and raised his head to watch as Shao Qie lifted the curtain and stepped out. Shen Zichuan finally had a night of sleep last night. At present, he was standing beside the horse carriage, puffing out warm air as he watched the gerfalcon hover in the snowy sky. Shao Qie stepped out of the door and got up the horse carriage. Gu Jin took the horsewhip and looked at Shen Zichuan. Shen Zichuan did not look at him. The curtain partially opened, and Shao Qie signaled to him with his eyes. Shen Zichuan immediately felt the stares on his back, as the Imperial Army, who had been freezing in the courtyard the entire night, all looked at him. He smiled at Shao Qie, then made his way up. Gu Jin drove, and the carriage started to sway. Shao Qie handed a hand-warmer to Shen Zichuan. When Shen Zichuan accepted it, Shao Qie stuck the back of his hand to the back of Shen Zichuan's hand. "So cold," Shao Qie said. "Songji loves Lianin at Kangji." Net Shen Zichuan raised his finger to push away Shao Qie's hand. He leaned against the wall and held the hand warmer. Shao Qie said, "You don't look too happy." Shen Zichuan warmed up his hands and said, "I'm happy." He looked at Shao Qie and said with a smile, "It makes me happy that the second young master spoke up for me and helped me out of a predicament." Shao Qie said, "This second young master did not do it for anyone." "That may be so," Shen Zichuan said. "Now that the prestige has been established, then when are you going to bestow them favors?" "5 There aren't many days left for me to be a guard. If you want to use me, you must hurry." Shao Qie looked at him and said nothing. Shen Zichuan lifted his chin slightly in a pose similar to a relaxing posture. He exhaled and said after a pause, "I'm not your match when it comes to governing others. Shun Lanzhao is a good target. Put him before you, and you can defend yourself and put on a deliberate show of strength to intimidate the tiger. 6. Maybe he can even warm your bed. This kind of killing 3 birds with 1 stone is truly hard to find. Xiaoer, you sure are impressive. There was a cacophony of human voices outside the carriage, while the atmosphere within the carriage grew increasingly heavy. Both men were just a few inches apart, but they seemed to be separated by a natural chasm. When the carriage arrived at its destination, Gu Jin tactfully did not say a word to disturb them. Having warmed his hands, Shen Zichuan put the hand warmer back on the small table and said, "What a pity." Xiao Qia said, "What? Everyone thinks you enjoy yourself to your heart's content every night." Shen Zichuan licked the tip of his teeth and said unhurriedly to him, "Who would have known you, Xiaoer, to be a diligent and conscientious Liu Xiaohui? 7. I haven't even touched your saliva before, let alone talk about being fucked by you." With that, he made to lift the curtain and get off the carriage. He did not expect Xiao Qia to hook his waist belt. "That's right." Xiao Qia smiled playfully. "Look at how eager you are to cross swords on the bed. I shall comply with your wish." Shen Zichuan said, "I don't want anyone with such fierce eyes." The curtain swayed. He had already gotten off the carriage. Xiao Qia's fingertips turned up empty. He waved them, as if wanting for more. After Tantai Hui's incident, the Imperial Army became less ostentatious. All of them tucked their tails between their legs and behaved themselves, thus reverting to the way they were before the autumn hunt. Chen Yang, even more prudent now, no longer dared to close an eye when others stirred up trouble. He had previously hurt his foot in Libei, and the cold was harsh in Kudu a few days later, so his foot would hurt for each day he was on duty. One day, after dinner, Xiao Qia threw Chen Yang several bottles of medicinal paste. When Chen Yang went back and opened them, they turned out to be the valuable paste that Xiao Jiming had gotten from the venerable Igui a few years back. He could not help but reproach himself again. From then on, he was even more diligent in his work. On the other side, Tantai who went home and found himself in dire straits just a few days later. Everyone in his family was dead, yet he had adopted 3 children from Zhongbua, all of whom lived on his salary. He was not married either, so he had no wife to manage affairs at home. All the money he received every month was spent until nothing was left. At present, he was in a short supply of rice and noodles, and he also had to prepare for the new year too. He was a veteran of Dengzhou, and he had buddies in Kudu. But all along, he had always been the one to take care of others. Now that it was his turn, he could not bring himself to borrow money from others, so he tightened his belt to feed the children. But this was, after all, not a long-term solution. Tantai, who was even thinking of being a loan shark and tagging along with others to collect debts when Chen Yang appeared on his doorsteps for a visit. "The new year is right around the corner," Chen Yang put down the money and said. "The Viceroy still remembers that there are 3 children in your family." Tantai, who turned his face away as he sat on the chair and said, "Since I'm no longer a soldier of the Imperial Army, then there's no reason for me to accept money from the Imperial Army." "You are truly a bona fide tiger," 8 Chen Yang said with a severe countenance. "Why are you still pissed with the Viceroy? You struck out at Shunzichuan with many people watching that day. Where is your respect for the Viceroy? Being too lax in military discipline is a major taboo. You have been a vice-commander for so long. Don't tell me you don't understand that." Tantai Hu said, "What can I do? Whenever I see Shin the 8th, I'll remember my parents." Chen Yang sighed and said, "Even so, you shouldn't have humiliated him and, consequently, the Viceroy too. You know the Viceroy's temperament after following him for a few years, so why did you still shoot your mouth off?" Tantai Hu rubbed his head. Chen Yang continued, "I was at fault too. I knew you were rash, but I didn't stop you. Admit your mistakes if you make one, and accept your punishment if you receive one. A real man can take temporary setbacks and adapt to circumstances. Must you go to the extent of quitting before you think yourself a real hero? Then what can I do? I have already handed in the waste token. When Tantai spoke to this point, he felt aggrieved and sad. I've followed the Viceroy for 5 years and worked myself to the bone during the autumn hunt. It wasn't easy for the Imperial Army to finally make a name for itself. I get afraid when I see that fox going in and out the whole day. The way he looks, I was really afraid that the Viceroy's future would be ruined. I was getting anxious, and I hate him to death. Ding Tao said something about how it's not his fault. That's right, who doesn't know that? But who could stand it if they were in my shoes? It was my parents and siblings who died, not a dog by the roadside. Chun Yang was silent too. Tantai stamped heavily on the ground and wiped his face haphazardly. The scar-faced man still shed tears when he recalled the past. He choked with sobs and said, anyone would not be happy to see a person they hate right in front of them, let alone someone with such enmity. That year when Zhongbua troops were defeated, Chun Yang, all of us who survived had our families broken up and ruined, while we ourselves barely escaped by the skin of their teeth. Who's going to take pity on us? Look at those 3 children in my house. They haven't even begun to recognize a few words before they were turned into orphans who have to dig mud under the hooves of the Biancha cavalry's horses in order to live. We are all lowly creatures. Chun Yang patted him and waited for him to calm down a little before saying, but now that you have joined the Imperial Army, the Viceroy is king. Huzi, 5 years ago, when the Viceroy cleaned up the Imperial Army, he had wanted to take in non-native military households 10 like you guys, but the Ministry of War did not agree. Do you still remember what the Viceroy said? Tai whose shoulders shook slightly. Chen Yang continued, isn't the reason you still want to be a soldier today because of what the Viceroy said that day? The feuds of our families has yet to be avenged, and the humiliation of our nation has yet to be redressed? The Imperial Army will one day ride the horses out of the mountain pass. Isn't killing the enemies with your own hands then much more gratifying than blaming another man today? How is it that you've forgotten this all with the passage of time? Tantai said, how would I dare to forget? I've never forgotten it for even a day. I gave this life to the Viceroy to use as he wished, all for that one day to come. Then it's all good, isn't it? Chun Yang got up and pushed the money to Tantai. Brothers don't bear each other overnight grudges. The Viceroy treats us as brothers. This money is from the Viceroy himself. After you've celebrated the Spring Festival, return to your original squad, hang up the squad commander waist token, and do your duties well. With mixed feelings, Tantai saw Chun Yang out of the door. When Chun Yang returned, he saw Shen Zichuan. Both men greeted each other on the veranda. As he lifted the curtain and went in, Shen Zichuan knew that the matter was done. Shen Zichuan was bored to death as he watched the falling snow. A vicious man like this could be disguised as fake even if he was real, and be made real even if he was fake. Others simply would not be able to tell whether the expression he put on was happiness or anger, nor would they be able to tell if he was being sincere or hypocritical. It did not take long before Chun Yang came out again. He lifted the curtain, nodded at Shen Zichuan and said, the Viceroy is waiting inside for you to have a meal together. Shen Zichuan turned around and saw Xiaoqia looking at him. Chapter 40. Tearing and Amp, Biting. Chapter 40. Tearing and Amp, Biting. Fresh vegetables were a rare sight in winter, and so the ones that fetched a high price in Kudu now were all green vegetables. Having been rewarded by Li Jianheng, Xiaoqia's dinner table tonight included a plate of crisp, shredded cucumber. Side dishes that accompany the main dishes help to invigorate the spleen and eliminate toxins. One Xiaoqia scooped up a bowl of hot soup and pushed it towards Shen Zichuan. You've been standing outside for so long. Warm yourself up and have a refreshing meal before you take a rest. As the saying goes, Shen Zichuan wiped his hands and took a seat. One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. So, what instructions does the second young master have? Plenty, Xiao Qie said. We'll talk as we eat. Both men lifted their chopsticks together. There was no one else inside the room. The 2 bowls of rice were quickly eaten clean, as was the plate of shredded cucumber that they split between themselves. Neither of them touched the meat dishes. The Spring Festival 3 is right around the corner, and my Shifu is coming to the capital. Xiao Qie drank the soup. If Ji Gangshifu is free, we can arrange for both elders to meet. A New Year celebration or a Hongmen banquet, for you have to make it clear. Shen Zichuan set down the chopsticks. My Shifu doesn't stake his life on games. New Year celebration, Xiao Qie said. There are only both of them left in this generation, and they have not seen each other in so many years. Sure. I'll prepare a big gift later and ask Shifu to come out of obscurity. Shen Zichuan had eaten his fill. Seeing him get up, Xiao Qie said, Rest in my room as usual tonight. Shen Zichuan looked back and smiled as he said, Naturally, I won't run. We'll take our turns in the bath. Take your time. I'll go first. With that, he lifted the curtain and headed inside to wash his face and rinse his mouth. Xiao Qie called for the servants to clear the table. As he stood by the window, he saw that it was snowing outside. He turned his head and saw Shen Zichuan's silhouette through the hazy curtain fabric. Shen Zichuan removed his outer garment. It was as if he was peeling away a layer of coarse shell to reveal the fresh, tender, and succulent flesh within. When he lowered his head to undo his waist belt, the curve of his nape danced with tangerine yellow light as if to add a velvety touch of exquisiteness to that already smooth part. Looking at him through the curtain fabric was just like scratching an itch through a boot. It magnified that temptation, which was brimming with desire, and scattered it, sending it wandering aimlessly through his limbs and bones. It tickled him so badly that it made him irritable and gave him certain violent thoughts. The man being like jade himself counted for nothing. What bothered Xiao Qie the most was Shen Zichuan's desire. That pair of eyes, and that kind of smile, whether by design or accident, he seemed to exude such a sexual desire. Come and hug me. Come and touch me. Come and sweat it out with me to your heart's content. This desire was as unaggressive as a drizzle, but unbeknownst to him, it had invaded his mind. Shen Zichuan himself seemed oblivious to it. He retained another kind of indifference that was diametrically opposed to lust as he breezily threw out this contradictory puzzle for others to think about. Xiao Qie did not want to continue to think. He was keenly aware that the eagle, this time, was not that easy to tame. He could only be his own master. He could not tolerate himself getting so easily and repeatedly aroused by his impulses. Xiao Qie turned back his head, closed the window, and went to the bath hall. Both men slept on each side with a block in between. Their backs were to each other, and their breathing was steady as if they had already fallen asleep. Xiao Qie kept close to his thumb ring and thought of many matters. This thumb ring did not belong to him. At first, it belonged to Feng Yixing of the Suotian Pass. When Feng Yixing died in battle, he left the thumb ring to Zhuo Qianqiu. Wearing this thumb ring, Zhuo Qianqiu made a name for himself during the battle at Tianfei Watchtower, where he shot an arrow at his wife, killing her. It was because of this that Zhuo Qianqiu's hair turned white, and also because of this that he never recovered from the setback. He had achieved fame and glory, but the person was dead. There was no way Zhuo Qianqiu could go on the battlefield again. His hands, which once made significant achievements at Tianfei Watchtower, could no longer wield the bow freely. As a child, Xiao Qie had followed Zhuo Qianqiu to ask him, "How did you end up shooting your wife to death?" Zhuo Qianqiu sanded the bowstring and asked, "Do you really want to be a general?" Xiao Qie nodded. Zhuo Qianqiu said, "Then don't start a family. A general dying in 100 battles is actually not that terrifying. What's terrifying is that the general, in all likelihood, will come to be confronted with choices. What you want and what you must shoulder are all different things." Shuiqianqiu looked at the bow in desolation. The grassland wind caressed his white hair. He said in a daze, "I hope you will never be trapped in such a desperate situation. When a man reaches that stage, he will die no matter what he chooses. You saved tens of thousands of people at Tianfei Watchtower." Xiao Qie leaned over the railing. "Why didn't you want to be conferred a title?" Shuiqianqiu laughed and said, "Because I died in battle." It was not until Xiao Qie grew up to be a youth that he understood Shuiqianqiu's words. In the battle at Tianfei Watchtower, Shuiqianqiu's beloved wife was taken prisoner. Between opening the gates to surrender, or shutting the gates to fight to the death, he could only choose one. Shuiqianqiu chose neither. He headed out of the city all by himself and drew his bow to shoot his beloved wife to death. Legend had it that the shot was the most steady shot he had ever fired in his life. He hit his target among countless people. The rain was pouring that night. No one knew if he had cried himself hoarse, or when his hair turned white. When the soldiers retreated at dawn, Shuiqianqiu stood upon the white expanse of bones to collect his wife's corpse and bury her. From then on, his reputation of thunder sinking the jade stage, Shuiqianqiu spread far and wide. Those who respected him would also curse him behind his back. A man who was that heartless would only make the common man think of him as a scourge, as if generals like him were all naturally born to be this cold-blooded. Xiao Qie treasured this thumb ring very much, but he also feared it. He was afraid that he would one day be caught in a dilemma too. So he had never spoken of lightly. Chen Yang had been with him for so long, and he still did not know what Xiao Qie was fond of. The wine he loved, the food he liked, the clothing he preferred. The truth was so mixed up with falsehood that no one could really tell. Libe. It was as if only this word was the destiny he had no way of hiding. He already had a taste of being in someone else's control because of desire. So how could he court trouble for himself again? Xiao Qie sat up soundlessly and looked at Shen Zichuan. He raised his hand. He just had to exert some force, and he could smother this desire to death. Shen Zichuan looked like he was having a nightmare. As he frowned, his temples were both drenched in a cold sweat. His back was already a little damp. Xiao Qie bent over to look at him and saw a Shen Zichuan he had never seen before. Shen Zichuan was trapped in the tide of blood. He was soaking wet all over. He touched himself. It was blood. The dream repeated itself every single day. He felt as if he was going mad. All of a sudden, Shen Zichuan gave a few subtle twitches. His tightly pursed lips slowly loosened apart to mutter something in his sleep amid his outbreak of cold sweat. He was this helpless. Something else from that deep, heavy fear suddenly dawned on Xiao Qie. He scrutinized Shen Zichuan like a massive beast observing its prey. Shen Zichuan was not invulnerable. Other than that unexplainable probing and dreading of each other, what they had was an even more inexplicable empathy between fellow sufferers. Shen Zichuan felt weary. He would no longer cry in his dreams, or strive to dig through the corpses. He had seen through the nightmare. He knew Ji Mu was dead. Hurry up. It was as if Shen Zichuan was an apathetic bystander. Let's get this over and done with. He urged it on brutally and ruthlessly, even wanting this blood to spill even more, and this snow to fall even harder. How else could he lay bare this nightmare? He no longer had any fear. This flesh and marrow had already been soaked rotten in the blood. He was a stray dog feeding on rotting flesh. The filthy water and abhorrence were merely evidence of his existence. Shen Zichuan suddenly opened his eyes and reached out to put his hands against Xiao Qie's chest. In just a few moments, he asked calmly while dripping with cold sweat, "Can't sleep?" Xiao Qie's chest was scalding hot. He could feel the iciness of Shen Zichuan's palms through the thin fabric. He replied, "I ate too much." Shen Zichuan said, "A timid person would have been scared to death if he saw a person right upon opening his eyes in the middle of the night." "I heard you calling me," Xiao Qie said without batting an eyelid. I have to determine if you were cursing me. If I curse you, it wouldn't be in my dreams. Scalded by Xiaoqia's body temperature, Shen Zichuan wanted to retract his fingers. Unexpectedly, Xiaoqia pressed his hands back and asked, "Are you cold?" Shen Zichuan's temples were still soaked. He smiled and said, "Yeah, I'm so cold." He had reverted to that seductive Shun Lanzhao. He did not care the least whether Xiaoqia had been tempted. This kind of ability was innate. It came to him naturally. He was a scum. Xiaoqia gripped his hands and pinned them down at the head of the bed. Sniffing his scent in the darkness, he said, "You sleep in my bed. You know very well what I think of every night. You said that I'm impressive. Shun Lanzhao, the impressive one is you. What's to be done then?" Shen Zichuan still sounded a little hoarse. He said nonchalantly, "I didn't do anything. I want to do it." Xiaoqia bent his head down to stare at him. "I want to do you. Choose some other ways to let me die." Shen Zichuan let him clasp both of his hands together. "It's too much of a failure to die in bed. I changed my mind." Xiaoqia caressed aside Shen Zichuan's damp hair with a freed hand and looked at him as if he was scrutinizing a jewel he had bought. "I don't want you to die," Shen Zichuan said. "I'd advise you not to bite this neck." "Lanzhao." Xiaoqia said his name with a sigh and jested. "Will you let me off even if I didn't?" Shen Zichuan looked at him. Xiaoqia asked, "Is it such a pleasure to tease me?" "Yeah." Shen Zichuan sensed Xiaoqia gradually drawing closer to him. "It pleasures me to see the pitiful look of a little wolf at a loss." "Then, we can be even more pleasured," Xiaoqia said. "The Empress Dowager has been putting up with it without making any move. What did she promise to give you? Throw it away. I'll give you much, much more." Shen Zichuan laughed. "I guess freedom is not included in the list of things you're giving me. Xiaoer, how is it that you never know that everything you want is all written in your eyes? You want to lock me up right this moment, am I right?" "I want to make a gold chain," Xiaoqia said. "It's too much of a pity for this neck not to be adorned with something." Dog chains were originally used to leash wolves. Shen Zichuan was so close to Xiaoqia that he could hear the latter's breathing. He said, "I want to put a gold chain around your neck too. For each word you say, I'll yank it once." "Let's not." Xiaoqia raised his eyebrows. "With your salary, you won't be able to afford it even if you empty your pockets." The tips of their noses were about to bump into each other. Xiaoqia's thumb ring was pressing against Sichuan's wrist, which had already reddened from his grip. Xiaoqia said, "Since it's..." Shen Zichuan raised his head and kissed him on the lips. Icy derision followed right on the heels of this encounter of soft lips. "Want to go wild with abandon?" The expression in Shen Zichuan's eyes was deranged as he murmured, "Do you dare? Try tearing me apart, Xiaoer. I don't care." The tightly wound string that was Xiaoqia's limit snapped with a twang, and those already tempestuous waves of emotions gushed forth with a roar. Amidst this mocking and instigation, he ruthlessly pinned down Shen Zichuan and kissed him back as if he was biting him. Lust interweaved with murderous intent. Hatred entangled with pity. Exactly who between them was the more detestable and pitiable one? Tongues intertwined in this wet kiss, where Xiaoqia kissed Shen Zichuan, and Shen Zichuan gave all he could to respond. There was the sensual sound of licking between their lips and teeth as desire burned up two abnormal men. Xiaoqia suddenly released his grip on Shen Zichuan's wrist and supported his back up, wanting them to press against each other intimately, skin to skin. This was mutual loathing, tainting the other party with the filthy stain that was their own, letting hatred turn into a bond that could not be torn apart. It was too much of an agony to live like this, being the only ones who could hear their own howls in the night. So why not come together and tear each other bloody? Let this visceral intimacy metamorphose into a form of solace they could rely on. This life was already rotten enough. Chapter 41, Lanzhao. Chapter 41. Lanzhou clothing was shoved up high, and skin that radiated out like moonlight felt icy cold to the touch. There were no caresses, only the tearing apart of each other. The thick, tangible night melted away into an expanse of spring water, into a night of heated passion and intoxicating pleasure. Xiao Qie scooped up this water. He struggled to prop himself up among the tidal waves of emotions and saw Shen Zichuan's eyes as he gasped for breath. In this pair of eyes, there was none of the temperature of one drowning in lust. They even reflected his absurd behavior at this very moment. Xiao Qie felt a wave of thrill cutting through him like a blade. He fondled Shen Zichuan until he made him hot, until he made this water rage. He bound Shen Zichuan from high in the clouds into the crooks of his arms, and squashed him hard as he licked and nipped at him wantonly. Biting down on the back of Shen Zichuan's neck was like taking in a mouthful of enchantment potion one into his mouth. The night was thoroughly wet, and the bedding was soaked in sweat. Intertwining limbs thrashed around on the bed, and it was in these urgent collisions that Xiao Qie gradually got a grasp on happiness. He progressed swiftly, surrendering himself in that mass of soft clouds, and hardening in the same mass of soft clouds. He pushed up hard silently against Shen Zichuan's vital spot, so much that Shen Zichuan had to strain to gulp even as his raised neck fearlessly exposed itself before Xiao Qie's eyes. Xiao Qie kissed this neck and scooped up both of Shen Zichuan's knees. He was no longer a hypocrite untempted by lust. He was an ordinary man who stormed the enemy's den and went in for the kill in the dark. He made it impossible for Shen Zichuan to remember the Chaucer sinkhole, and made it just as impossible for Shen Zichuan to forget this intense merging of bodies. They had no life-saving straw to clutch at. This was a night of indulgence to break free of their misery. Pleasure blazed through their bodies like a raging inferno. Shen Zichuan reached out for the headboard, and Xiao Qie dragged him back and locked him in an embrace. "Go on, show me how feral you can get," Xiao Qie whispered. "You want me to go wild with abandon, so how dare you run? Don't you want to see who is more savage? I'm not afraid." Shen Zichuan's cheek chafed against the bedding as he closed his eyes and gasped for breath. The expression of pain, of being unable to take it, on this face was all a captivating seduction. How did he blossom into such a visage? Xiao Qie pinched his chin and held it up to kiss him without letting him pant or rest. In the time the sides on the back of his waist were numbed, he ejaculated completely into him. Shen Zichuan was still shuddering from the climactic high, but Xiao Qie did not stop. He turned Shen Zichuan over and thrust in again. The cold wind howled endlessly outside the window, and the suppressed sounds of panting cut through the darkness. Xiao Qie dripped with sweat as he kissed Shen Zichuan over and over again. He did not want to concede defeat, but he had already been vanquished. Xiao Qie fell asleep. The ferocity and fury in his features had all dissolved away into a kind of displeasure from being brash. He held on to one of Shen Zichuan's wrist, making it seem like both men were snuggling against each other this winter night, consequently turning those merciless kisses into a scalding hot furnace. Outside, the snow fell for the entire night, drifting gently like willow catkins. The sound of wind was nowhere to be heard. When it was nearly daybreak, Shen Zichuan extracted his wrist from Xiao Qie's grip. Xiao Qie's fingers chased after him, moving under the bedding. Chen Yang, who was outside the door, saw Shen Zichuan come out of the room. "Military drill grounds," Shen Zichuan said concisely. Chen Yang nodded. As he was about to make way, he caught a glimpse of the injury on Shen Zichuan's lips. He looked as if he was about to say a word, but hesitated. Shen Zichuan glanced at him and saw through what he was thinking, so he said, "The Imperial Bodyguard's reorganization deployment order should be issued these few days. Thank you for your kind treatment during this period of time." Chen Yang said, a few days earlier, "What's over is over, there's no need to speak of it." Shen Zichuan was gratuitously cold today. He said, We will all be patrolling Kudu in the future, so it'll be inevitable for us to bump into each other. I'll act with caution, and I'd advise the various Imperial Army brothers to be prudent as well." Qin Yang paused. But Shun Zichuan smiled and continued, "It hasn't been easy for the Imperial Army to be where they are today. But time changes, and every dog has its day, so who can say for sure when it comes to the future?" Without waiting for Qin Yang to answer, he lifted his robe and left. Ding Tao patted the snow off his shoulders and fell over to hang in midair. Swinging with his brush in his mouth, he gazed at Shun Zichuan's back with a frown. On seeing this, Qin Yang asked, "What's the matter?" "Songji loves Liaoning at Kangji," Ned Ding Tao said. "Don't you think he is a little sad today?" Qin Yang turned his head to see the corner of Shun Zichuan's robe. He said, "Is that so? He seems fine to me. He's smiling." Ding Tao fished out his book from his bosom and wrote a few characters while suspended in midair. He lamented, maybe it was because he had a fight with the second young master last night. That was quite the commotion from what I've heard. Feeling a little embarrassed, Qin Yang looked up and said, "Gu Jin, didn't you teach him about the birds and bees? From my calculations, this lad is already 16. In Libei, it'd be time for him to marry a wife." Gu Jin did not reply. Qin Yang said, "Do you hear me? He has cotton stuffed in his ears." Ding Tao stuffed the book back into his bosom and turned back to remove the cotton in one of Gu Jin's ears. He shouted, "Jin Ji! Qin Yang is calling you." Gu Jin gave a start and nearly slipped down from above. He shoved Ding Tao's face away and frowned as he poked his head out to ask, "What?" Qin Yang pointed to Ding Tao and said, "Send him away. Sell him and add to your wine budget this month." Gu Jin grasped Ding Tao by the neck and said, "He can't sell for much going by this weight." There were movements inside the room, and all three men simultaneously fell silent. After a while, Xiao Qie came out of the room. As he put on his clothes, he swept a glance around, then looked at Ding Tao. "Dage will be coming to the capital in a few days." Xiao Qie's lips hurt a little when he spoke. He pressed his tongue against it but gave up quickly. "There's no need to submit reports of trivial issues." Ding Tao nodded his head hard, like a little chick pecking at grains. After a moment's pause, Xiao Qie asked, "Why are you still here?" Ding Tao scratched the back of his head in puzzlement. He looked at Qin Yang, then at Gu Jin, and finally back at Xiao Qie. He said, "Young master, I'm on duty today." Xiao Qie questioned, "Where's the man I told you to keep an eye on?" Ding Tao said, He already left." Xiao Qie said nothing. When Qin Yang led the horse over, Xiao Qie flipped onto it. Just before he left, he pointed to Ding Tao. "Throw him out." Ding Tao had yet to climb up the horse. Before he could react to Xiao Qie's words, he was already hoisted up by Qin Yang and Gu Jin. The color drained from his face as he clutched his little book and said, "Please don't. Young master, I did nothing wrong these days." He had already been tossed out. After throwing him out, Qin Yang stepped forward and said, "Master, Shifu should be arriving today." Without saying a word more, Xiao Qie spurred his horse on and headed out of the city. Shun Zichuan did not go to the military drill grounds at Mount Feng. Instead, he braved the snow to return to Zhao Zui Temple. Ji Gang had not seen him for several days, so he rushed to buy roast chicken after letting Shun Zichuan in. It had been a while since Grand Mentor Qi last saw him too. At this moment, he was holding a brush and squinting his eyes to write characters. On seeing Shun Zichuan enter, he hurriedly threw the brush away and called out to him, "Lands Hao?" Shun Zichuan lifted his robe to sit upright opposite Grand Mentor Qi. Grand Mentor Qi said, "The Imperial Bodyguard's deployment order is about to be issued soon, right? Where do you want to go?" Shun Zichuan replied, "The Imperial Carriage's office. Close to the Emperor." Grand Mentor Qi nodded. On seeing the wound on Shun Zichuan's lips, he switched the topic and asked, "Has something happened outside lately?" After a moment of silence, Shen Zichuan said, "Now that His Majesty has Hai Liangyi to protect him, I fear that even a hopeless case can pose as a pillar of the state, much like a rotten wood pretending to be a beam. For back then, when I saved Xiao'er, it was because the ascension of His Majesty to the throne was a foregone conclusion. Killing him would, on the contrary, mess up the chessboard. A messed-up chessboard is nothing. What's to be feared is a messed-up heart and mind." Grand Mentor Qi looked at him. "Have you gained any new perspectives all these days you were staying by Xiao II's side?" Shen Zichuan wiped the ink stains on his fingertips and thought for a long time before saying, "It's too much of a pity for him to be born after Xiao Jiming. It's fine if they can keep him under control in this life, but if they can't..." Shen Zichuan looked at Grand Mentor Qi, but did not continue his words. But Grand Mentor Qi said, "Lanzhao, you still don't get it." Shen Zichuan was slightly stunned. Grand Mentor Qi stood up and paced for 2 steps. Gazing at the snow in the courtyard, he suddenly let out a long sigh. "You killed Ji Lei." Shen Zichuan stopped wiping. In a rare philosophical state, Grand Mentor Qi said, "Lanzhao, we are both trapped here. We live on hatred, but we mustn't let ourselves be killed by hatred. 5 years ago, you couldn't have done such an utterly ruthless act. But 5 years later, you can already take charge to do such a clean and efficient job of it. I imparted the classics to you, but I don't want you to be manipulated by hatred. It's hard to be righteous when you take the lives of the living. You won't be able to turn back if you fall too far. Without exorcising your inner demons, you will forever be trapped in a nightmare. Ji Lei deserves death, and it's still death for him even if you end him in one slash. Think about your days in Duanzhou. I have no wish to see you walk a cold-blooded and cold-hearted path. You said it's a pity Xiao Qie was born after Xiao Jiming. What I'm going to tell you is the exact opposite. Just imagine for a moment that Ji Mu is the hereditary prince of Libei today. Can there be no other reason for him to leave you in Kudu other than a lack of alternatives? The sharp edge of a treasured sword comes only by honing it. Xiao Qie is a sword. He has yet to notice it himself, but his elder brother has, for many years, placed high hopes on him. Libei has never been stingy with praises that he deserves either. If he's a son without a use, 5 they would have chosen to dote on him to make him happy. But Xiao Jiming not only took him to battles, he even gave him a free hand in leading the troop. Since he's already left with no room for retreat, then was his handing over his younger brother really just to make him miserable? 5 years ago, in Libei, Xiao Qie did not know how to exercise restraint, but now, he has already learned how to rein in his arrogance and willfulness. Everything learned from word of mouth can be superficial. It's only those you come to understand through your own sufferings that are the real masterstroke. Xiao Jiming is a great elder brother. Being born after Xiao Jiming is never the most pitiful thing about Xiao Qie. Lanzhao, this brotherly sentiment should be something you understand the most. Yet it has now become the brotherliness you understand the least. Grand Mentor Qi paused for a long time, looking somewhat gloomy and depressed. Then he looked at Shen Zichuan again, and kneeled to pat Shen Zichuan slowly on the head with his wizened palm. Teacher taught you the classics and gave you the courtesy name Lanzhao. Unruffled is the orchid 6 that grows on stone step. Boundless is the horizons of the boat 7 that crosses the sea of misery. Wide is the heart that accommodates 100 rivers, and broad is the vision that encompasses 1,000 lakes. You're a good child. Killing is merely a means to an end. 8 Hatred may be hard to eliminate, but your heart must never change. 9 Lanzhao, oh Lanzhao, don't you still have your Shifu and teacher? Why must you force yourself into such a corner? It may not be a bad idea to just voice out your unhappiness these 5 years. Shen Zichuan stared blankly at Grand Mentor Qi. 25 years ago, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince left. How I long every day, and resent every night, for not being able to take that blow for him, to kill the enemy with my own hands. I stewed in resentment until I turned into this state. I became your teacher. Grand Mentor Qi choked a little with emotion. I want you to kill my enemy for me. But I can't have you turn into a blade who has forgotten who you are. You are a person, Lanzhao. Don't forget your carefree days in Duanzhou. Although Jimu died, he didn't die because of you. It's heaven's decree. What is past is past. You did not escape and survived the Chaucer sinkhole to shoulder a sin. You are the continuation of existence for him, for those 40,000 soldiers. Silly child, Ji Gang has been so careful, so how did he still let you lead yourself so astray that you'd blame the wrong person? Shen Zichuan closed his eyes. He heard Jimu's calls, and he thought of Shaoqia's scent. At this very moment, he finally understood why he was so infatuated with that scent. That was the brilliance of the scorching sun, the light that could allow him to escape from the Chaucer sinkhole. Even if it were only for a moment, it would allow him to forget the tides of blood and the rain of arrows, to forget the cold and the corpses. He could no longer remember the days in Duanzhou. They were too distant, so distant that they seemed to be the memories of his past life. He could no longer even recall Ji Mu's heartily laughing face. He had plunged into a nightmare, tormenting himself every single moment. Ji Mu was dead. Song Ji loves Liaoning at Kangji. Net, why wasn't he the one to die that day? The fact that his Shifu did not blame him was the greatest reproach of all. What he could not struggle free of was the sense of guilt that would haunt him for a lifetime. There was no way he could tell Grand Mentor Qi candidly that, with the passage of time, he had finally killed off himself. Shao Qia was the reflection on the other end who had everything he did not have. He observed Shao Qia, clumsily trying to imitate him so that he could let himself look more like a person. He could not tell anyone that the Shen Zichuan living in this body was a repulsive killer. He was already standing at the edge of the abyss. Shen Zichuan lowered his eyes under Grand Mentor Qi's palm like a child respectfully listening to his teachings. He listened devoutly. Yet it was in this very instant that he realized he was no longer able to shed tears. His throat throbbed slightly. Eventually, he said, feeling comforted, "It's as teacher said." 3 days later, the Imperial Bodyguard's deployment order was announced. Han Qing, the original assistant commander of the 8 Great Training Divisions, was transferred over to be the Imperial Bodyguard's commander-in-chief, while staff from the Imperial Bodyguard's 12 offices were reassigned. Shen Zichuan was redeployed from the domesticated elephant's office to the Imperial Carriage's office, and Gu Qingqing was promoted from company commander to judge. Shen Zichuan's new waist token had the word, Emperor's Entourage. The Imperial Carriage's office was a great place to go, since being close to the Emperor would make it easiest for him to get into the Emperor's good graces. Shao Qia, originally the Imperial Army's viceroy, also took on the post of the 8 Great Training Division's commander, thereby legitimizing his authority over the patrols of Kudu. After that one night, he welcomed Zhou Qianqiu and stayed at the military drill grounds in Mount Feng. Even until the time Shen Zichuan left the Imperial Army's residence, both men never saw each other again. Master. Chen Yang attended to Shao Qia at the latter's side and said in a soft voice, "The original arrangement was the domesticated steed's office. Who would have expected it to be the Imperial Carriage's office when the deployment order was issued?" Shao Qia was solving a Chinese rings puzzle. 11. His hand movements slowed as he said, "That could only mean he didn't care for it." Chen Yang said, "But isn't going to work in the Emperor's presence makes it much easier for him to meet with misfortune that'll cost him his life?" Secretariat Elder Hai was the one who urged the former Emperor to kill him back then, demanding repayment right on the crux of the matter. His heart is not on carrying out his duties lawfully. Shao Qia tossed away the rings and said, "Ji Lei is dead. Han Cheng is a stand-in from the 8 Great Training Divisions. The Imperial Bodyguards is now without a master. What do you think he wants to do by stepping up now?" Chen Yang pondered for a moment and said, if he succeeds." Shao Chia looked towards the military drill grounds. Then he will have his claws and fangs. 12 Qin Yang did not venture to speak. A little while later, Shao Chia continued, the Ji clan dominates the imperial bodyguards. He has Ji Gang as his shield. It's simply effortless for him to move up using past relationships and old sentiments as his blade. Although we can't get our men in, we can limit his chances. There has to be a justification for getting a promotion and riches. If nothing goes wrong before the emperor, then he can be held back from making any moves. Since the imperial army now has the responsibility of patrolling, then why trouble the imperial bodyguards? Chen Yang said, this subordinate understands it now. Shao Chia drank a mouthful of water, thought for a moment, then said, pick a low-key place and lay the table for a feast. Him and I will pick our fights and we'll still have our meals. He pursed the part of his lips that had been bitten. After all, we could be considered fellow disciples of the same school of martial arts. Chapter 42. Red Plum Blossoms. Chapter 42. Red Plum Blossoms. Shao Chia fixed the date for the feast before the banquet of 100 officials. Chen Yang went to deliver the invitation, but Gu Qingqing was the one who came to receive it. Lanzhao has been on duty in the emperor's presence lately. He doesn't have any free time, so I'll receive this on his behalf. Gu Qingqing kept away the invitation. Once he was done exchanging conventional greetings with Chen Yang, he said, the imperial army now has the world at its feet. I suppose Deputy General Chen is busy as well? The Viceroy has been working hard on official documents every day. As men who follow and serve him, there's no such thing as being busy. Chen Yang drank the tea and said, Gu Xiong received a blessing out of misfortune this time and was promoted to judge. Your future is bright. That's truly impressive. Both men feigned civility as they spoke cordially with one another and tried their best not to disgrace themselves. Conflicts had arisen between the imperial bodyguards and imperial army lately, resulting in some discord. They were now at a point where they would loathe each other on sight. It was only when his cup was changed to a fresh cup of tea that Chen Yang got up to say his farewell. Gu Qingqing saw him out, and Shen Zichuan, who was inside, lifted the curtain to walk out. This invitation came at a bad time. Gu Qingqing handed the invitation to him. Are you really going? Why not? Shen Zichuan opened the invitation and saw Shao Chia's forceful and bold calligraphy. Shao II's inhibition of the imperial bodyguards is building up momentum these days. Our missions keep getting intercepted by the imperial army. Furthermore, he has the trust and favor of the emperor. If he were to do something right this moment, Gu Qingqing's voice trailed off. What he wants to do couldn't be any more obvious. Shen Zichuan closed the invitation. He wants to suppress the imperial bodyguards and turn Kudu into a territory under his control so that His Majesty only has his imperial army to rely on. As to be expected, he will still deal a few more blows to the imperial bodyguards. Exactly. It's too risky at present to take Uncle Ji along to the feast, Gu Qingqing said. Shen Zichuan offhandedly tossed the invitation onto the table and said, This involves Sua Qianqiu. He won't lay a trap here. Gu Qingqing still did not feel too reassured. The wound on Shen Zichuan's lips had healed. He put on his overcoat and said, I'm going out for a while. Shen Zichuan waded through the snow and headed out. The snow was not heavy today, but the wind was strong. He arrived at Donglong Street and made his way to a Hua Pavilion at the opposite corner of Shangyun Villa. Shi Hongxian had recently composed some classical poems. The tunes on the music scores were handed to the courtesans on Donglong Street to sing, and it unexpectedly turned into a grand occasion. Best of all, he had hollowed out the ground at the foot of a Hua Pavilion stage and filled it with open-mouthed copper jars with only a layer of wooden plank spread out on top. At the same time, he also bought a new batch of young girls from Jueshi. After training them for many days, he secured bells on their ankles, so that when they danced on the stage with their wooden clogs stepping out a rhythm, the sounds of the bells would merge into the copper jars. It was ethereal and wonderful. At present, those on the stage were still singing Shi Hongshuan's poem. Grasping his folding fan, he reclined against a rattan chair on the third floor and listened with closed eyes. A maidservant did not make any sound as she stepped on the woolen rug wearing only plain socks. She kneeled outside the bead curtain and said softly, "Second master, the guest has arrived." Without opening his eyes, Shi Hongxian shut his fan. Liaoning at Kangji. Net the maidservant rose to her feet and lifted the curtain for Shen Zichuan. Shen Zichuan entered and saw another girl kneeling at Shi Hongshuan's feet to massage his legs for him. "Invite young Master Shen to take a seat." Shi Hongxian was still tapping out a rhythm as he focused on the singing. The kneeling girl shuffled over on her knees and attempted to help Shen Zichuan take off his shoes. Shen Zichuan raised a hand to stop her and sat down on a chair. It was only when the tune ended that Shi Hongxian sat up. As he drank his tea, he pointed at the girl with his fan and said, "She's new and untainted." Shen Zichuan did not look at her. Shi Hongxian laughed. Looking at him, he said, "Don't tell me you've really involved yourself with Xiao II? What? You still want to keep yourself chaste for him?" The hair on Shen Zichuan's temples looked as if they were soaked in ink, yet in this warm room, the contrast made his facial features seem distant. It gave him an otherworldly aura. He said, "Since you've called me here, then cut the chatter." Shi Hongxian spread open his folding fan. With his obese body crammed into the rattan chair, he said, "We are buddies. I see you having a hard time staying by Xiao II's side, so I called you here today to let you have a good time. If we were to speak of being pitiful, then you, Shen Lanzhao, wins hands down. Xiao II gave you a kick in the past, sowing the seeds of illness and making you chronically sick and frail. And now you still have to pretend to be chummy with him. He is really your nemesis." "That's right," Shen Zichuan did not evade the topic. He seemed resigned. "He's such a jerk. But from how I see it, he doesn't seem to be planning to leave the imperial bodyguards any leeway." Shi Hongxian said, "Lanzhao, looks like your pillow talk didn't really sway him. You are a besotted man." Shen Zichuan accepted the warm handkerchief the girl presented to him to wipe his hands. A smile at the turn of his eyes, and that coolness he wore when he stepped through the door vanished without a trace and subconsciously embellished his usual expression. "You think of your dear sister-in-law with such perseverance and consistency. After betting her once, you shower her with favor and love her to bit. But it's just a one-night stand between Xiaoer and me. How could it be considered love?" "So what you're saying is," Shi Hongxian picked up the chopsticks, "you're just having a fling?" "Even having a fling is an art," Shen Zichuan said. "Everyone tumbled in bed once, each with his own needs. It's over once the merrymaking is done. If you keep thinking of it every day, then it wouldn't be purely a fling anymore, would it?" Shi Hongxian clasped his hands and laughed out loud. He said, Well, what a fine Lanzhao. I was afraid he might have you by the balls, and you'd forget that we are the ones who are comrades in the same boat. Here, come and taste this dish. These are wild vegetables delivered with the greatest urgency from Qinzhou. It's good stuff that even the imperial kitchen doesn't have." Both men picked the dishes to sample. Shi Hongxian said, "This Xiao II is truly something else. No one paid him any attention in the past, and then he showed his true mettle in the autumn hunt. Now he can't hide it anymore, so he simply charges head-on with disregard to obstacles posed by the others. He took over the military affairs of the 8th Great Training Divisions, yet handed all the key positions to his trusted aides. As a result, none of the 8 great clans has any real power. But he kept up his pretenses so flawlessly that no one could get any dirt on him at all. Tell me, doesn't that piss you off? Isn't that hateful?" Shen Zichuan saw a dish of shredded cucumbers on the table, but he did not touch any of it. He said, "Xiaoer burned all his boats at the Nanlin hunting grounds. He staked it all on the chance that His Majesty will remember their friendship and let him go. But this hope was all in vain, much like drawing water with a sieve. What's more, he ended up being closely watched by the 6 ministries. He can't turn back time, so he could only ensure that he holds real military power in Kudu. Compared with the 8 great training divisions, the Imperial Army is like fireflies and the bright moon. They are useful, but not that useful. It hasn't been easy for him to finally gain the upper hand now. Naturally, he will not pass up the opportunity. In the past, there was still Panrugi in the 24 Yamen, and the Eastern Depot could, no matter what, take him down a notch. But now that Panrugi is dead, the Eastern Depot has gone into decline too. Fine then, there's really no one in such a big kudu who can beat him, Xiao Suan. Shi Hongxian took a bite of the food and said, I've not been in His Majesty's favor these days. His Majesty now listens to Hai Liangyi, having made up his mind to be a wise monarch of a golden age. He's no longer that willing to play with me now. Shen Zichuan finished his food and said unhurriedly, a person who has lived for over 20 years would have already formed a fixed temper. If a mere few words can make him mend his ways, then nothing else in this world will be difficult. Shi Hongxuan's chopsticks paused. He said, You mean, Hai Liangyi is a gentleman among gentlemen. Shen Zichuan set aside his chopsticks. He's like the water so crystal clear you can see its bottom. His encounter with the current emperor is like water coming into contact with hot oil. Sooner or later, it will explode and splatter all over. Xue Xiuzhua has long reached this position, but why isn't he willing to go further? Grand Secretariat, isn't it? It's not like he isn't qualified. What the central administration lacked right this moment are precisely talent. Shi Hongxian mulled it over in silence. Shen Zichuan said, Now that foreign enemies are before us, how can the 8 great clans still stand divided and do things their own ways? You have already become the head of the Shi clan. As they said, fortunes rise and fall. Now that the opportunity is within reach, don't tell me you're going to let it go? Shi Hongxian set aside his chopsticks. He wiped his sweat with his handkerchief and looked at Shen Zichuan to ask, You want me to contact the 8 great clans and get them to join forces to deal with Xiao II? Shen Zichuan said, Xiao'er is only just one of them. Nowadays, the civil officials are in favor. Consequently, the Imperial College looks to be on the up and up. Within a few years, the sons of common birth from humble families will enter the official ranks one after another. When that happens, what's going to happen to all the precious sons of the 8 great clans who are used to loafing around? If the poor rise in power, leading to an emergence of new nobles, then second young master, the 8 great clans will no longer be the 8 great clans. Shi Hongxian said, Even so, this is too thorny an issue. Leaving everything else aside, that Yao Wenyu will never agree. He's Hai Liangyi's student, one whom Hai Liangyi himself personally instructs. These years, he has traveled over the world for his studies and made the acquaintance of countless talents and sages. He definitely won't form an alliance with us. Shen Zichuan said with a smile, 8 great clans just mean the 8 great clans. There's no reason for it to be just these 8 clans. If the Yao clan doesn't cut it, then just change to another one. Shi Hongxian did not eat any more. He pushed aside his chair and walked around the room. After some time, he looked at Shen Zichuan. But do you have any way to keep Xiao II still? If he wants to protect the emperor, then he won't just sit and do nothing. I'm not worried if it's just him. But there's the Libei armored cavalry standing behind him. With Xiao Jiming around, Xiao Suan can't be touched nor harmed. He's too tough to deal with. Xiao Jiming is formidable, but his power and prestige all lie at the frontier. Shen Zichuan propped up his head. The eyes under the shadows could not be seen clearly. He gave Shi Hongxian one last push. Kudu is your place. As they said, a mighty dragon is no match for a serpent in its territory. 4 ways are aplenty if you want Xiaoer to be too up to his neck dealing with his own affairs to interfere. Shi Hongxian was so deep in thought that he did not realize that Shen Zichuan had said, "Your and not our." He asked, "What ways?" Shen Zichuan let out a soundless laugh and said, "Xiaoer's influence depends entirely on His Majesty's trust. They have been buddies for many years with merry days of drinking behind them. What's more, Xiaoer has saved his life. So there's indeed nothing to be done about it for a moment. But things like friendship are just like autumn dew hanging on branches. It'll be gone once you leave it out to dry under the full, blazing sun." Shi Hongxian looked at Shen Zichuan. He recalled Ji Lei on that rainy night, and all the mountain games and wild vegetables he had swallowed earlier churned in his stomach. He forcibly braced himself so that he would betray nothing in his expression and said with a smile, "Since you have got it all worked out, then tell me." After Shen Zichuan left, Shi Hongxian lay back on the rattan chair and got the waiters to clear the table. It was a challenge for him to turn over, so he needed someone to help him. He felt alarmingly stifled for no reason and had the men open the windows. Xue Xiuzhua came out from the partitioned-off area. Shi Hongxian lamented, "You heard it too, right?" Fortunately, he was born as Shen Wei's son. If he were to rise in power, he would be even more difficult to deal with than Xiao II. To use someone, you have to use the right method. Xue Xiuzhua poured tea. There is no one in this world who has no desires and wants. Shen Lanzhao has his weaknesses too. As long as we have a grasp on it, then even the most vicious dog is nothing to be feared. But we can't find any. Shi Hongxian tapped the center of his forehead with his fan. Look at how callous he is towards Xiao II. It's obvious he turned his back on him after getting off the bed. Humiliation and flattery don't work on this kind of evildoers. You can't even threaten him. Xue Xiuzhua swallowed the tea, smiled, and said in a gentle and refined manner, "What's the hurry? Just do as he says. Success or not, it's all a disaster for Xiao II. When the time comes, he will expose his own true motives." Shen Zichuan headed downstairs, but did not rush to leave. The procuress greeted him. She only knew he was Shi Hongxuan's honored guest, so she fawned on him and said, "What's master looking at?" Looking cannot be compared to trying them out in person. Shen Zichuan sized up the gorgeously dressed courtesans and asked, "Do you have male courtesans?" The procuress twisted her body around and said to the person behind her, "Lead this master upstairs and get a few clean, tender-faced boys to serve him." Shen Zichuan sat in the room for a short while before 3 male courtesans entered. He swept a glance at them. They were all neatly tidied up. The procuress was astute and knew how to choose appearances. After looking through the entire building, she could not find anyone who was more gorgeous than Shen Zichuan, so she took the unconventional gambit of sending him delicate-looking youths. The boys stepped forth to take off Shen Zichuan's shoes, but Shen Zichuan slightly shifted his feet away. Thus they kneeled and did not dare to move again. Shen Zichuan gazed out of the window. After a while, he said, "Strip." The 3 of them obediently shed off their clothes. Shen Zichuan looked at those fair shoulders when they were midway through stripping, but from start to end, his heart remained as calm as still water. He then looked at their hands. Each looked like girls' hands, as if they had led pampered lives. There were no calluses on their hands, and they were not wearing thumb rings either. Shen Zichuan slowly breathed out a sigh and rose to his feet. Without even bothering to announce his departure, he pushed the door open and left, leaving behind the 3 male courtesans to look at each other in astonishment. Ding Tao had been following Shen Zichuan. Seeing him finally walk out of Ohua Pavilion, he meticulously jotted down a note in the little book that was now crumpled from being clutched by him. By the time he was done recording, he saw Shen Zichuan merging into the crowd. Ding Tao did not dare to be negligent, so he hurriedly chased after Shen Zichuan and followed him at a safe distance. Shen Zichuan was not really walking that fast, yet, in just a blink of an eye, he disappeared. Ding Tao let out an exclamation of surprise and hurried over, only to have his path blocked by a tall and sturdy man wearing a bamboo hat. As soon as he neared the other party, he knew that this was a man well versed in martial arts. It was jam-packed with people all around. Ding Tao did not wish to hurt them, so he endured it and did not act out. This, consequently, allowed Shun Zichuan to shake him off. He shook a fist, but then he felt a sense of familiarity from that tall and sturdy man earlier. The snow intensified as soon as it was dark. The tall and sturdy man walked for some distance while holding down his bamboo hat. But the moment he turned, he entered a blind alley. Shun Zichuan stood behind him and cast a glance at him. He said, "You've been following me for half a month. What do you want?" The tall and sturdy man pressed his bamboo hat lower, but let out a laugh and said, "How sharp. To think you noticed it early on. Your breath-concealing skills are outstanding." Shun Zichuan said, "Didn't you teach me some tricks yourself? You disappear without a trace the moment you are released from prison, so that they'd chase after you out of Kudu. You sure have gone to great pains." The man lifted his bamboo hat to reveal a face with stubble. Xiao Tianya blew at the wisp of hair before his forehead and said, "It'd have been fine for you to lure me into a wine shop. Do we have to stand here and talk? Jade rabbits are hard to catch." Shun Zichuan looked at him for a moment and said, "Should I call you Xiao Tianya? Or Songyue? Lianin at Kangji. Net, as you please." Xiao Tianya said, "Call me Xiao Tianya and we'd be acquaintances. Call me Songyue and you'd be my master. Your Excellency is a capable man. How did you come to bow down and submit to my teacher?" Shun Zichuan asked. "What can I do?" Xiao Tianya let out a self-mocking laugh. "I owe my life to Grand Mentor Qi, and I have to repay it by toiling hard like an ox or a horse for him for the rest of my life. So the reason everything went smoothly at the hunting grounds that night," Shun Zichuan said, "was because of your help. Taking you as my master means that it's your cues I'm taking." Xiao Tianya said, "You originally wanted to kill the Prince of Chu that night, but you didn't expect Shao II to be so bold as to stuff him right before the imperial bodyguards to dupe them and lead them on a wild goose chase. However, you are quick-witted. You could actually even seize the opportunity to give Shao II a helping hand." "That's all the capability I have," Shun Zichuan said. Xiao Tianya patted the snow off his shoulders and said, "I'll follow you in the future, master. If there's meat to eat in the future, don't forget to give me a bowl of soup to drink. I'm much easier to provide for than those guards of Shao II. Ding Tao is young." Shun Zichuan threw the money pouch at him in passing. "Chun Yang and Gu Jin are the ones who are the tough nuts." Xiao Tianya took the money and said, "You have gotten such a clear handle on Shao II. But he is still thinking about how you've saved his life." Shun Zichuan smiled. "You really want to follow him, huh?" "I'm a guard with unwavering loyalty." Xiao Tianya innocently raised his hands. "If Shao II is willing to buy me for 1,000 gold, I'll naturally be willing to go through fire and water 5 for him." Shun Zichuan said, "A pity it's already crowded around him. How would there be any place left for you?" "My littler master," Xiao Tianya tilted his head and squinted an eye to say, "has a truly vicious mouth." Shun Zichuan put on a "you flatter me" expression. "But this line," Xiao Tianya grinned, "is applicable to both of us." 8 days later, Shun Zichuan and Ji Gang arrived as planned. Ding Tao had obviously made his complaint known. Gu Jin, who did not drink today, stood outside the door. From a distance away, he saw Xiao Tianya, who was following behind Shun Zichuan. Ding Tao immediately tiptoed and whispered, "Jin Ji, that's him. He's the one." Shun Zichuan and Ji Gang were led through the door by Chen Yang. Xiao Tianya naturally had to remain outside. But he did not have that self-awareness, and his leg that was about to stride forward was blocked by Gu Jin. "I heard you stood in this lad's path a few days ago." Gu Jin looked at the bamboo hat with sharp eyes. What kind of hero are you for bullying a child? Ding Tao snorted with righteous indignation and parroted, What kind of hero? Xiao Tianya burst out laughing. He backhandedly took off his bamboo hat and said with a cheeky grin, Aren't we here for a meal tonight? So why are we still going to fight? It's the first time I've seen this little buddy here. Bro, have you gotten the wrong person? Ding Tao let out an exclamation and fumed. How can you say that? I wouldn't mistake you for someone else. Gu Jin stopped Ding Tao and faced Xiao Tianya. Two men of almost the same height came face to face until they were almost bumping against one another. Gu Jin said, Today is not the right time. Let's set a date for later. I'm not free. Xiao Tianya tugged at that wisp of hair before his forehead and threw Gu Jin a provocative smile. After all, my master only has me. Where on earth would I have that much free time to raise a younger brother for fun? Gu Jin coldly spat out a mouthful of saliva and said, Tell me your name. There will be plenty of occasions for us to meet in the future. This humble servant is Xiao Yeye. Xiao Tianya tapped his temple at Ding Tao with 2 fingers. Also known as Xiaosong. 6 Chen Yang led Shen Zichuan and Ji Gang inside. This courtyard was deep. They passed the Chaos Ho Veranda 7 and stepped through a moon gate 8 to the elegant view of an entire courtyard full of red plum blossoms. Xiao Qie was standing under a tree waiting when Shen Zichuan stepped in. They exchanged glances for a fleeting second, but before that subtle feeling could be conveyed, both men simultaneously averted their gazes. Xiao Qie welcomed Ji Gang and greeted him with a smile. Please excuse me for not going out to meet Shirshu even though Shirshu has braved the snow to come here. The wine and dishes have been prepared. Shifu has been waiting inside for a long time. Ji Gang looked at Xiao Qie and stopped him from paying his respects. He said, Your Shifu has broken away from the Ji clan over 20 years ago, and your martial arts now has a distinctive style of its own. Since we aren't from the same school of martial arts, there is no need to be overly polite. Xiao Qie said, Our martial arts can be traced to the same origin, and so that means we are from the same school. It's all thanks to the initiation of the Ji clan fist style that I could master the blend of martial arts from various clans today. I've long heard of Shirshu's reputation, and I admire Shirshu for it. So no matter what, this respect must be paid. Xiao Qie bowed in respect and led Ji Gang inside. He did not forget to turn his head and said to Shen Zichuan, Lanzhao and I have not seen each other for a long time, too. Shen Zichuan strode through the door and said with a smile, Shixiang has such power and influence now. You must be busy. We are from the same school of martial arts. Xiao Qie said in a neutral tone. I'll have to leave some time aside for you no matter how busy I am. How would it do for you to delay your work because of me? Shen Zichuan said, I've been on idle duties every day lately, and this is already all thanks to Shixiang for looking out for me. With pleasure. Xiao Qie lifted the curtain. If you want to be busy, just come to me. I will sweep the couch clean to await you any time. 9 Shen Zichuan's nape started aching when he heard the word couch. There seemed to be a lingering heat at those spots where he had been bitten before. It was so scalding that his smile faded. Zhuqianxue was dressed in a wide-sleeved robe with slanting collars, with white hair pulled up into a bun. He did not look like a refined scholar or an awe-inspiring general. He was clearly several years older than Ji Gang, yet he looked younger than Ji Gang. If he had to be described, then it would be that he had an otherworldly aura to him. It seemed that the rumors in the martial fraternity of him becoming a monk were not totally groundless. Zhuqianxue turned around and saw Ji Gang. Ji Gang was dressed in short-length plain cotton clothing with a thick jacket. He stood there, with a disfigured face, and looked at him. In an instant the past came surging forth. Cheers and laughter of youths rang close in his ears, but the man before him was already old and white-haired. Xiao Qie broke the silence and said, Both Shifu shall have their meals in here, while Lanzhao and I shall wait outside. Chuaner, Fasten your overcoat properly. Ji Gang looked lonely as he turned sideways and urged Shen Zichuan, come in if you feel cold. Shen Zichuan nodded. Lianin at Kangji. Net Zhuqianqiu said, Ayi, take care of your shitty. Xiao Qia smiled in acknowledgement, and both men retreated out. It's cold outside, yet it's a rare clear night. Shen Zichuan descended the stairs and saw the deep woods of red plum blossoms. There was a bridge within. This courtyard was so refined it did not seem to be Xiao Qia's style. This courtyard was bought with money from the Yao clan. Xiao Qia seemed to know what Shen Zichuan was thinking. He stood behind Shen Zichuan and raised his hands to brush aside the red plum blossoms to reveal the surrounding clear stream. Pretty. And expensive too. And you still bear to part with the money. Shen Zichuan did not look back. Xiao Qia bumped lightly into Shen Zichuan's back with his chest and raised a hand to cover the top of Shen Zichuan's head. He leaned in close to Shen Zichuan's ear and said flippantly, red plums blanketed in snow. Fragrance enveloped Lanzhou. His smile's worth 1,000 gold. You must have even put up your pants as collateral. Shen Zichuan really began to smile slowly. I had to spend a sum, yes. But Yao Wenyu was already selling it at a low price. Xiao Qia paused and continued, you ran pretty fast. To avoid me, you've spent a lot of effort too. It's not that I'm avoiding you. Shen Zichuan lifted his finger to push away Xiao Qia's palm. But is there an important matter we need to discuss face to face? Xiao Qia smiled and said with a little ruthlessness thrown in, can't you dote on your second young master a little after betting him? Shen Zichuan took a few steps forward to leave Xiao Qia's chest, then turned to scrutinize Xiao Qia without saying a word. In this starry night adorned with plum blossoms, both men finally, in retrospect, came to understand something. Xiao Qia discovered that what he had grabbed that night was water. Once it flowed past, it was really gone. Shen Zichuan was not even the slightest reluctant to leave. After the frenzy of biting and tearing at each other, that lingering heat had also ended up buried under the colors of the night. In the ecstasy where Shen Zichuan had raised his neck in intoxication, he had not seared him, Xiao Suan, into his memories at all. Once again, Xiao Qia distinctly realized one thing. He was the only one who was defeated by lust that night. I advised you before. Shen Zichuan raised his fingers to hold down the plum blossom's branch and said bewitchingly to Xiao Qia that it'd be best not to bite this nape. Bedroom pleasure, Xiao Qia revealed a frivolous smile, is not something I can do alone. The greatest difference between you and me is desire. You are covered in desire all over. You spare no effort to hide your wild ambitions. A nape is merely one of the minor adversities. You hold me back, wanting to resist it, wanting to defeat it, but in the end you still lose to it. But Suan. Shen Zichuan plucked a plum blossom, tore the petal, and delivered it to his mouth. I don't even have lust. So how are you going to pit yourself against me? Xiao Qia drew a step closer and grabbed Shen Zichuan's flower-holding hand. He bent over to press in close to him and said breezily, what is one time? So boring. We should do it a few more rounds. You couldn't use those courtesans from Ohua Pavilion, and you didn't dare to touch those boys too. You pretend to be a celibate and aloof sage. But I wasn't the one who gasped and panted so delicately that night. Xiao Qia pulled Shen Zichuan's hand to his lips, pressed against it dangerously, and scoffed. It's true I've lost to lust. But if you are that steadfast, then why did you try stirring up a storm under the sheets 11 with me? Shen Lanzhou, you are much more afraid of succumbing to desire than I am, aren't you? Chapter 43, Atlas. Chapter 43. Atlas. After 3 bouts of drinking in the house, much of the sense of estrangement had dispersed. Although they still had not warmed up to each other, it was already more than enough for them to have a chat over wine. Ji Gang removed the muffler around his neck and took a sip of wine. When Zhuqianqiu saw the burn marks on his exposed neck too, he could not help but ask, back then, the Bianxia cavalry invaded Duanzhou. How did you end up in this state? Ji Gang twirled his wine cup around and smiled. Shen Wei beat such a quick retreat that Duanzhou did not even hold out for a day. The horses of the Biancha cavalry were too fast, and my legs aren't as fast as they used to be, so how could I have escaped? At that time, I was already ready to fight to the death. At this point, he thought of Hua Pingting and could not help but choke with emotion. He turned his head aside and rubbed his face. He did not continue. Zhuo Qianxiu downed the cup of wine and said, Shen Wei deserved to be killed. It wasn't just Shen Wei who deserves death. Ji Gang said bitterly, the defeat of the Zhongbua troops was so fishy. For the blame to be pushed to Shen Wei alone means that they were certain he wouldn't survive. Zhuo Qianxiu said, you have been away from Kudu for a long time. How can you be so sure that Shen Wei was a scapegoat? 5 years ago, when Chuaner entered the capital, someone plotted against him while he was in the imperial prison. Ji Gang said, at that time, Shen Wei was already dead. Yet someone still wanted to wipe out his family to eradicate potential sources of trouble. Why? Wasn't it precisely because they wanted to silence him? Zhuo Qianxiu drank his wine in silence. After a while, he said, now that they are all dead, I'm afraid it won't be easy to relaunch a thorough investigation into the defeat of Zhongbua troops. Is your disciple thinking of seeking revenge for Shen Wei? The wine had already gotten to Ji Gang's head. These 5 years, he had completely abstained from drinking, and he could be said to have broken his vow of abstinence tonight for Zhuo Qianxiu. Holding on to the table edge for support, he sneered, revenge. Why would Chuaner want to seek revenge for Shen Wei? Zhuo Qianxiu, how can you be as narrow-minded as they are? Are you telling me that everyone in the world with the surname Shen is guilty of sin? Chuaner has grown up. He's sensible enough to know better, and he can tell right from wrong. He and Shen Wei just happened to be born as father and son. Other than that body of flesh he got from Shen Wei, they have nothing to do with each other. Why are all of you pushing him into such a corner? Shen Wei is already dead. Shouldn't you look to the Biancha cavalry to avenge this so-called blood feud of Zhongbua? Ji Gang suddenly smashed the wine cup. His chest heaved. Conducting a thorough investigation of the Zhongbua's troops' defeat isn't for anyone, but to get to the bottom of the matter. Why should he be made to bear such a sin? You have been a general too. Haven't you thought of it? 5 years ago, someone could make the Zhongbua's troops suffer a defeat. 5 years later, he could do the same to another place. Back then, the Biancha cavalry could keep up with such a tight pursuit. Would they have been able to do it without inside help and map? Zhuo Qianxiu sighed and said, Gang Di, one please be appeased. Back then, when Jiming rushed over to Zhongbua, the first thing he did was to cut off the main route leading from Zhongbua to Danqing in order to investigate where the 12 tribes of Biancha's information came from. But the situation was critical at that time. Do you know how difficult it was? All the evidence pointed to Shen Wei. Yet, Shen Wei just had to burn himself to death, leaving behind a son of common birth whom he did not favor. How could anyone not get suspicious? After a moment of silence, Ji Gang said, that kick your disciple gave him almost killed him. Zhuo Qianxiu downed the wine again and said, I won't defend him, but listen. Gang Di, we each have our own experiences, and we each act in accordance with our own wants. Ji Gang sneered and said, sure thing. Just pay lip service and consider it a closed case. Without saying a word more, Zhuo Qianxiu turned over an empty cup and shouted out, Aye. The door opened right at once. Zhuo Qianxiu poured wine with one hand and tossed a cup over with the other hand and said, apologize to your Shishu and Shidi. Lianin at Kangji. Net Ji Gang leveled his chopsticks and caught the wine cup on the tip. He said, we were the ones whose skills left much to be desired back then. Chuaner, come and make the toast. As soon as the words left his mouth, he turned the wine cup towards Shen Zichuan. Shao Qia blocked it mid-air and said, Lanzhao, let's not fight with Shixiang over this, all right? Shen Zichuan lifted his leg to hit Xiaoqia's arm askew. That wine cup wobbled and fell. He said, "It's hard for one to defy his Shifu's orders. Xixiang, please give way to me." Both men's palms intersected. Xiaoqia backhandedly pushed back Shen Zichuan's arm. That wine cup was about to hit the ground, but Shen Zichuan extended his leg and lifted it to bring the wine cup up again. There seems to be the sound of the wind as both men exchanged blows. That wine cup rose and dropped, but not even a drop of wine was spilled. Without letting up his chopsticks, Ji Gang ate a few mouthfuls of cold dishes and said, "This martial arts stance is not imparted from the Ji clan." Zhuo Qianxue looked at both men and said, "That's the Shao clan's martial arts. It's like a raptor grabbing its prey. Once caught, it'll be hard to break free. Lanzhao, focus on attacking his lower body to throw him into confusion." Shen Zichuan immediately withdrew his hand and took a step back to throw out a sudden kick. Xiaoqia dodged a little. He wanted to say something to Shen Zichuan, but in the end, he said nothing in the presence of both Shifu. As he parried the blow, he grabbed hold of Shen Zichuan's ankle and took advantage of the obstruction of his body to grope Shen Zichuan's leg along the curve of Shen Zichuan's calf. Then he gently led Shen Zichuan toward himself. "How ruthless!" Xiaoqia's expression was calm. "Your kick makes me too powerless to resist." Being touched by Xiaoqia caused Shen Zichuan to almost lose his balance, and he still had to catch hold of the wine cup. Xiaoqia patiently waited for him to catch the wine cup before he suddenly threw out a punch right in Shen Zichuan's face. Ji Clan fist. Ji Gang's chopsticks paused. He held back for a moment, but in the end, he conceded. No wonder Chuaner praised him. This body of his was simply too suitable. His punch was so perfectly executed that even Ji Gang could not find fault with it. Shen Zichuan made a grab for the wine cup with one hand, but it was ill-advised for him to press on and catch hold of it, so he abruptly leaned back. The wind that exploded forth from Xiaoqia's fist swept past his temple. Before he could get up, Xiaoqia strode forward and pressed in towards him. In passing, he lowered the fist he had thrown out and reached inside Shen Zichuan's collar to pinch out the remnant of the plum blossom that Shen Zichuan had bitten earlier. "You've fallen for my trap." Xiaoqia's eyes glinted with mischief as he sent this half of the plum blossom into his mouth. Shen Zichuan wanted to get up, but Xiaoqia thwarted his attempt and raised his head to say quickly, "The wine is spilled." Stunned, Shen Zichuan lifted his head for a look, and Xiaoqia grasped hold of his hand and pushed his thumb up along Shen Zichuan's inner wrist to drink up the wine in one toast from Shen Zichuan's hand. "Thank you, Shitty, for the wine." Xiaoqia immediately stepped back and said gentlemanly, "The taste of it leaves a lingering aroma on the buds." The inner side of Shen Zichuan's wrist was still scalding from being stroked by Xiaoqia. He rose to his feet and bowed with a brandish of his sleeves before putting the wine cup back on the table. Ji Gang did not know about the exchange of undercurrents between them. On seeing the outcome, he said, "The difficulty in blending the stances of 100 schools of martial arts is in threading them together into one. You have taught him well." Zhuo Qianxue said. "He still has a long way to go. Lanzhao specializes in Ji Clan mental technique. His focus is truly impressive." Both men poured wine again, while Xiaoqia and Shen Zichuan retreated out for the second time. The moment the door closed, Xiaoqia grabbed hold of Shen Zichuan and said, "This bout of drinking won't end tonight. It's cold outside. Let's sit inside the house." The original study of the Yao clan was to the north of the corridor. In order to keep the room dry so that the books would not be damaged, a sleeper wall was built underneath. The books had yet to be removed at the moment, and all 4 shelves of the open bookcase were full of antique calligraphy and paintings. Xiaoqia took off his overcoat and sat at the desk with one leg over the other to flip through a book. He said, "This courtyard was originally built by the old master of the Yao clan. Plenty of good stuff is hidden here. Yao Wenyu doesn't like to play with them, so they have been shelved here all this time and have never been moved before." Shen Zichuan wiped his hands clean before touching the books on the bookshelf. Those from the Yao clan loved books. The old master of the Yao clan had sorted them out into different categories and arranged them neatly. It had been so long, and yet the pages were still clean. It must have been Xiao Qie who got someone else to take good care of them once he took over the compound. There was not even a speck of dust on them. Both men each stayed at a side. No one spoke again. Shen Zichuan, having kept his eyes open, saw a Hongyan picture book in the local records. He opened it and, sure enough, saw the choreographical map of the Hongyan Mountains. For help with the upcoming text, you can refer to the maps here. Hongyan Mountains were divided into two ranges, the east and west. The West Mountain Range passed through Luoxia Pass to connect to Quanqing and separate out Huaizhou. It used to be the line of defense at the borders of Dazhou. Later, Xiao Fengshu expanded the territory and extended the line of defense all the way to the East Mountain Range, thereby shaping Li Bei's great commandery into the way it was today. Shen Zichuan flipped towards the back and saw a detailed description of the Northeast Provisions bridle path. Kudu dispatched to all the granaries in the world, with army provisions mostly transferred from Jueshi's Qinzhou. Deliveries towards the two major regions of the north and east could not be done through the waterways, so they could only dig out bridle paths for the specific purpose of transporting provisions. The situation in Qidong was more complicated, whereas Li Bei's northeast provisions bridle path was clear-cut. Food provisions were transported from Qinzhou to Yongyi Harbor, 3 from Yongyi Harbor to Kudu, then from Kudu to Quanqing. From Quanqing onwards, they could spur the horses on in a straight line along the Northeast Provisions bridle path to reach Li Bei Great Commandery. The Northeast Provisions bridle path was an important military supplies transportation route of Li Bei, guarded by multiple layers of Li Bei armored cavalry. Even if the emperor himself went, he would not be able to pass through without Xiao Jiming's commander's tally for authorization of passage. All along, the defense of the Northeast Provisions bridle path had always been unassailable no matter how brutal the battles at the borders were. Not once had they ever allowed the Biancha cavalry to get close before. In fact, 5 years ago, when the troops of Zhongbo were defeated, the reason Xiao Jiming had been able to deploy troops to the south so swiftly was because the Northeast Provisions bridle path just happened to cut across the northwestern side of Cizhou. This gave him the confidence to dispatch his troops right at once. The Northeast Provisions bridle path. At some point in time, Xiao Qie had leaned over towards him. He swept a few glances down along Shen Zichuan's hands and asked, "Are you interested in the deployment of troops into battles too?" "Nope." Shen Zichuan replied without thinking. "Doesn't matter. Second young master will teach you." Xiao Qie held Shen Zichuan by the wrist and led his finger to slide towards the easternmost Chashi River. "You recognize this place, right? The Chashi River of Zhongbua is Dazhou's easternmost line of defense. Pass through it, and you'd be in the great desert of Biancha. Come to think of it, it's pretty interesting. All along, Biancha had only dared to attack the Bianjuan commandery." Shen Zichuan looked down along his finger at the southeast corner of Tianfei Watchtower. There, close to the desert looking like the only breach to Dazhou, was the Bianjuan commandery. Because the Bianjuan commandery is too much of a coincidence. The places above it have Tianfei Watchtower to bar the way, while the places below it have Suotian Pass to block off access from the side. Only the Bianjuan commandery is a strategic point in the southeastern part of Dazhou that cannot make use of the terrain to fortify its defenses. Xiao Qie moved closer and focused on the map. "It's here where the Lu clan defends. You know of Lu Guangbai's title? The reason he's called Fire Beacon amidst blowing sand is because the Lu clan defends tens of thousands of Li 5 of desert fire beacon towers. The Biancha cavalry are crafty. They like to launch night assaults. Every time they cross swords, Lu Guangbai has to light up the fire beacons. The Bianjuan commandery garrison troops is Dazhou's best infantry for night attack. They are experts at laying ambushes." Xiao Qia was a little excited by the time he spoke to this point. So he simply held Shen Zichuan's finger and pointed to the Bianjuan commandery. Of the 4 generals in the world, Shifu is the general most skilled in defenses, as necessitated by the terrain of the Tianfei watchtower, so there is no need to press an attack or dispatch troops. Don't be fooled by how unremarkable the Bianjuan commandery look. In fact, the one best at attrition warfare 6 is Lu Guangbai. Even my eldest brother and commander-in-chief Qi aren't as formidable as him when it comes to this. There are no cavalry in the Bianjuan commandery. Shen Zichuan turned his head slightly to the side and cast a glance at him. Xiao Qia smiled. He seemed particularly relaxed at this moment. He said, Lu Guangbai doesn't need them. His soldiers are the bane of all cavalries. The Lu clan has been standing guard in the desert for generations. The climate is bad, and the wasteland can't be cultivated at all. They are genuinely poor, so they can't afford to raise horses. But even without horses, the battles still need to be fought. So the Lu clan developed a battle array through trials and errors for the specific purpose of resisting cavalries. Shen Zichuan looked back at the map. By interesting, are you referring to how unusual it was for the Biancha cavalry to deviate from their usual way of doing things to storm the Chasha River's line of defense 5 years ago? That's right. When Xiao Qia was deep in thought, he would turn his thumb ring out of habit. But at this moment, he was holding Shen Zichuan's hand. Thus he ended up pinching the latter without seeming to be conscious of this act. You have to know one thing first. The 12 tribes of Biancha is a collective title. At the start, there were over 12 tribes of them in the desert. The Huiyan tribe, which has dealings with Libei's mutual trade market, is a small tribe that was driven out of their land rich in water and grass by the other tribes. To survive, they threw in their lot with Dazhou. In short, the current 12 tribes of Biancha are distinguished between the strong and weak too. They never had a designated sovereign, so they have never been able to come to an agreement with us and could only fight. Actually, each battle fought is a heavy blow to Biancha. Their strongest tribe, the Hanshi tribe, lies to their north, dealing primarily with the armored cavalry of Libei, while their swiftest Guma tribe lies to the south, dealing primarily with the garrison troops of the Bianjuan commandery. These are fixed patterns formed over long periods of confrontations, but 5 years ago, the Hanshi tribe and Guma tribes came together in the middle to deliver a severe blow directly to the Chasha River's line of defense without warning. Xiao Qia paused. Lianin at Kangji. Net, there is only one possibility in such a situation. They had a plan all worked out in advance. Shen Zichuan said. They were sure that Zhongbua could not stop them, and Li Bei and the Bianjuan commandery would not come to the rescue in time. And that was how rumors that Xin Wei had colluded with the enemies came about. Xiao Qia said. It was a very risky thing for them to dive straight in. It won't be easy for them to rely solely on their spoils of war to continue battling 7 in an unfamiliar environment. They are already used to galloping across the desert. To them, combat on the streets is like fighting with their hands and feet bound. Furthermore, the closer they got to Kudu, the more obvious the intent for their troop deployment was. Breaching Kudu was not at all a good choice. Kudu is the heart of Dazhou. Stay here for too long, and they would end up trapped in a 3-way siege from the Libei armored cavalry, Qidong 5 commandery's garrison troops, and the 8 great training divisions. Shen Zichuan lowered his eyes. I've never believed that the Biancha cavalry wanted to attack Kudu. You are too smart. Xiao Qia praised him. He slid Shen Zichuan's finger across the entire map and pointed to Jueshi at the westernmost part. I think they wanted to head here. Jueshi faces the sea. It has 2 major harbors and 3 major grain reserves prefectures. All the military provisions from Libei, Kudu, and Qidong come from here. As long as they entered within Jueshi's boundary, they wouldn't even need to attack and take down the cities and towns, and they would already have all 3 parties by the throat. If there were no inside help, then this would be a flight of fancy. Shen Zichuan pondered over it and said, "It's just a straight line from east to west from Zhongbua to Jueshi. Crossing through Zhongbua is the shortest route." Shen Wei opened the gates for them and gave them the courage and provisions to continue further in. Without the northeast provisions bridle path, Dage would not be able to send troops for at least another 7 days. 7 days. If the 8 great training divisions failed to defend Kudu, then the Biancha cavalry would have already arrived at Yongyi Harbor. Xiao Qia said, "This was one reason for Li Bei's wrath. There is no room for blatant disregard of ethics in the face of the enemy's forces. We can forgive Shen Wei for the defeat of his troops, but we will never forgive Shen Wei for this stab in the back." Shen Zichuan suddenly turned his head and looked at Xiao Qia in close proximity. "What's the matter?" Xiao Qia did not intend to release him. Shen Wei colluded with the enemies. Shen Zichuan revealed an odd smile. Shen Wei colluded with the enemy. The 12 tribes of Biancha wanted to attack Jueshi. But where did Shen Wei get his hands on Jueshi's military map? "The Ministry of War has it," Xiao Qia said. "Money makes the mare go. Bribe them heavily and you can buy it." "In that case," Shen Zichuan said, "anyone else besides Shen Wei could have done it." Chapter 44. Night Chat. Chapter 44. Night Chat. That may be so. Xiao Qia lowered his eyes, but the one directly connected to the success or failure on the front line was Shen Wei. The expression in his eyes looked particularly tender and loving when he lowered them this way. The brilliance from earlier had yet to dissipate. It shimmered in his eyes like fireflies in the night. Shen Zichuan looked at him for a moment and said, "The Ministry of War has no personnel transfer these years. Investigate if you want to." Xiao Qia said, "I won't stop you." "Of course you won't." Shen Zichuan shifted his gaze back to the book. "Because you want to investigate too." The most obvious suspect should have been the Hua clan, but Shen Wei was already a tainted blade. There are thousands of simpler ways to dispose of him. Involving too many people would only just make it easier to leave behind a trail that could be used against them. "You killed Jilei, no?" Xiao Qia smiled. "He should have given you plenty of information. There is no fun in hiding it away, is there? Lay it out on the table so that we can speculate together. I know everything you have said, yet what I'll be saying is known only to me." Shen Zichuan extracted his hand bit by bit. "It's really too unfair a trade." Xiao Qia thought for a moment, then said, "How about this then? We'll do a 1-for-1 exchange." "Sure." Shen Zichuan said, "You go first." Making use of his height, Xiao Qia barricaded Shen Zichuan at the side of the bookshelf and raised a hand to flip through the pages at random. He said, "Don't you know the rules? Secrets have to be said on the quiet." Shen Zichuan leaned forward and said on the quiet, not said while sticking together. "What if the walls have ears?" Xiao Qia put the book back, propped up his arm and smiled at him. "After all, I've only just bought this compound. I have yet to acquaint myself with it that well. It's better to exercise caution." "Xiaoer." Shen Zichuan looked at the book. "You're truly an asshole." "That's right," Xiao Qia said. "But what can you do?" "All right, I'm going to start." Shen Zichuan waited for a moment but did not hear any sound. The moment he turned his head, he realized that Xiao Qia was still looking at him. It was only when both men's breathing intersected that Xiao Qia said, "Shen Wei didn't set himself on fire. The fire at the Prince of Jianxing Manor was set by the imperial bodyguards. The one who went there with the orders was Jilei. You know that, right?" "Yes," Shen Zichuan said calmly. "It's no secret. Lianin at Kangji. Net, then, do you know the real reason for the fall of Duanzhou?" Xiao Qia asked. Shen Zichuan could not turn his eyes away. He could not even take his time to ponder over it, because the instant he could not keep up with Xiao Qia's train of thought, he would easily fall into the other party's trap. Shen Zichuan said, "When the Chaosha River was attacked, Shen Wei ordered the Duanzhou garrison troops to retreat, leaving behind the hereditary prince, Shinjoji, to head over to Chasha River to provide support. Shinjoji was cut from the same cloth as his old man. He abandoned the Chasha River soldiers and took his own bodyguards to flee right before the battle, but he was dragged through the public road to his death on the same day itself by the Byansha cavalry. With Shinjoji's death, the Chasha River's morale took a beating. After the soldiers were massacred, Duanzhou no longer had any military forces to stand before them. "That's right," Xiao Qia said, "but there's one thing you don't know. While Shinjoji was still alive, he worked with Shen Wei to strangle the commander of the Duanzhou garrison troops, Tantai Long, to death." Tantai Long, Tantai who? No wonder Tantai, who said that his own brother had been in the Chasher sinkhole too. Shen Zichuan frowned and asked, "Strangled to death?" Because Tantai Long insisted on deploying troops to meet the enemy head-on. He repeatedly contradicted Shen Wei in public. After Shen Wei's withdrawal order was issued, Tantai Long defied the command and refused to obey. So Shen Wei pretended to make amends with wine. After the drink, he joined forces with Shinjoji to strangle Tantai Long to death in his room. Xiao Qia paused. Laohu doesn't know. He thought Tantai Long was killed in battle. And this is the first matter I'm telling you. Your turn. Shen Zichuan quickly sorted out his thoughts and said, Shen Wei was a participant in the struggle for the throne and carried out assassinations for the Empress Dowager. Afterward, he was closely watched by the Empress Dowager. Sensing danger, he bribed Pan Rugi and went to Zhongbua. One mustn't lay a hand on one's watchdog, Xiao Qia said. Under normal situations, the Hua clan would not choose this kind of risky way to take down Shen Wei. There is no benefit to the Empress Dowager, who is already in control of Dazhou's administration and governmental affairs. The demand for money after the battle far exceeded the availability in Dazhou's treasury. The Empress Dowager still wants to be the Grand Emperor one behind the screen. Doing so would be detrimental to herself. Shen Wei wasn't worth the price. Shen Zichuan gave a slight nod of his head and said, so whatever Ji Lei said might not necessarily be entirely right, because he himself was just a pawn too. If you want to investigate this matter, you have to start from the Ministry of War, which could lead you either way to the top or bottom. Xiao Qia said, I'll investigate the top. You investigate the bottom. Top and bottom are all linked. They are inseparable. It was only when Shen Zichuan spoke to this point that he realized that Xiao Qia was making a pass at him. He flipped through the book and feigned obliviousness. With a hint of a smile, Xiao Qia stepped aside and said, Take a seat. It was hot inside the house. Xiao Qia was dressed in a scarlet court robe 3 with an embroidered lion. For he was now a bona fide second-grade 5 viceroy of 2 armies in Kudu. Presumably, he had headed straight here after leaving the palace and had yet to change out of his attire. His facial features were all the more dashing set against the contrast of his outfit as he sat in the chair. It had even dismissed the frivolous air around him. Both men faced each other across the table. Xiao Qia looked on as Shen Zichuan read the book. He did not even bother to hide it now, and that undisguised interest of his circled Shen Zichuan's neck and settled on Shen Zichuan's hands. He was no longer fixated on one spot. He wanted to see all of Shen Zichuan's body. Shen Zichuan's fingers would bend when he reached out to flip the pages. This made Xiao Qia think of a different moment when Shen Zichuan's fingers, slicked with hot, damp sweat, would also curl up like this to grip the bedding even as they rocked like the surging waves. Shen Zichuan felt as though his fingers were still being grasped and played with in a certain man's palms. Feeling restless out of the blue, he closed the book and looked right at Xiao Qia. Xiao Qia said, Shen Zichuan slightly clasped his fingers together and said with a curve of his lips, The Imperial Army is bogged down with tasks lately. I'm afraid you won't have the time to investigate other matters. Xiao Qia twirled his thumb ring around and said, Being busy is just temporary. If the Imperial bodyguards have the time to spare, They can share our imperial army's worries and help with our problems. I'm just a mere soldier. I have no official post, nor do I enjoy the trust and favor of the emperor. How could I command the imperial bodyguards? Shen Zichuan leaned back slightly against the back of the chair. The imperial army has to manage patrols in Kudu, as well as private cases of the imperial court. They have to be prudent in everything they do, while the viceroy has to go to great pains and expend great effort. It isn't easy. Xiao Qie was truly busy now that he had suppressed the imperial bodyguards. He could read the provocation in Shen Zichuan's words. So he laced his fingers, set them right before Shen Zichuan, and said with certainty, "You want to create trouble for me. Tit for tat." Shen Zichuan said mildly, "You intercepted all my duties, thereby giving me free time. Naturally, I have to thank you properly. There are so many ways to express your thanks. Why not choose one that would delight everyone?" Xiao Qie said, "Looks like you indeed have friends in the 6 ministries. Having money at home is not as good as having friends in the imperial court. My friend told me something. I guess you'd be interested too." Shen Zichuan said. Xiao Qie stared at him and said, "I'm all ears." But Shen Zichuan surveyed the study and said, "Come to think of it, it's a pity that I have yet to meet this unpolished jade Yuanjua 6 Yao Wenyu. Are you on good terms with him?" Xiao Qie said, "A passing acquaintance. He can't be compared to you. The Yao clan is on the decline, yet they still stand among the 8 great clans. It's inevitable that there would be people who can't accept this." Shen Zichuan said, "Yao Wenyu is Secretariat Elder Hai's pupil, yet he doesn't join the imperial court as an official. This is just like throwing away his weapon to let others slaughter him as they please." Xiao Qie said, "Even though the Yao clan seems to be on the decline on the surface, the remnants of power and prestige accumulated over 3 reigns are still there. Yao Wenyu might be a refined man of leisure, but he is by no means a fool. Who would want to mess with the Yao clan?" Shen Zichuan put on a contemplative expression and said, "How would I know about that?" Xiao Qie fell silent, but he reacted quickly and said, "You aren't that generous a person. By going out of your way to give me news, you've instead made me uneasy, Lanzhao. We are going to investigate the case together. Anything I can help with, I'll not decline to." Shen Zichuan said, "It's only when I saw you on good terms with the Yao clan that I remembered this. The 8 great clans have stood tall for a very long time. Seeing how powerful and mighty you are now, wouldn't it only to be expected if they were to be scheming something? If the Yao clan isn't willing to associate with them, then they would inevitably become the target of their ire." Xiao Qie took over command of the 8 great training divisions and upset the 8 great clans' military power. All along, the 8 great training divisions were the 8 great clans' assets for contingency purposes that circled around Kudu. Losing an official post was nothing, they still had the younger generations at home to replace them. But losing the 8 great training divisions meant that they would fall under the control of others for real. It was one thing for them to mutually contain one another, and another to be controlled by Xiao Qie. As the saying goes, it's a general truism of the world that anything long divided will surely unite, and anything long united will surely divide. 7 And now, Xiao Qie was the common foe the 8 great clans had to reunite again to deal with. What Shen Zichuan had said was not wrong, but Xiao Qie could still smell something fishy about these seemingly honest words. Xiao Qie said without batting an eyelid, "The threat I pose to them hasn't reached that extent yet. The permanent solution would be to nip it in the bud. You have already displayed your abilities during the autumn hunt. Pretending that nothing had happened now is merely deceiving yourself, much like plugging your ears while stealing a bell." Shen Zichuan said. Xiao Qie suddenly asked, "Who's your friend?" "Lianin at Kangji." Net Shen Zichuan smiled at him and said, "Even if I tell you the truth, would you dare to believe it?" Xiao Qie stared restlessly at Shen Zichuan. He wouldn't believe him. Shen Zichuan was good at bewitching others. Every word he said while he was sober was a cocktail of truths and lies. This man was so difficult to deal with that Xiao Qie even felt that he was much easier to talk to in bed. "I'll ferret him out." Xiao Qie leaned closer to him. "You only need to expose your trail, and you won't be able to escape my eyes. You are already about to be unable to fend for yourself." Shen Zichuan said cheerfully. "You'd best think of a way first to ride out this storm safely. To think your heart doesn't even ache for me at all." Xiao Qie suddenly made a switch away from his solemn expression. "One night together as husband and wife is affection for 100 more. 8 Lanzhao, you are too callous." Shen Zichuan imitated his previous words and said, "That's right. But what can you do?" Xiao Qie sat down and propped up his leg again. Reclining back against the chair, he pondered for a moment and said, "This matter is an easy one to resolve. It's not really that big of a deal. I'll have to thank you for your reminder tonight." "That's really too kind of you," Shen Zichuan said. 100 taels will do." "No money." Xiao Qie dragged out his words. "My annual salary as a second-grade official is only 150 taels. But even without money, I can use something else in exchange. This second young master will warm your bed for you." "Then forget it." Shen Zichuan smiled politely. "I'm used to sleeping alone. I don't need to warm my bed. Habits can be changed." Xiao Qie lifted his fingers to his nose to take a sniff. Casting a sidelong glance at him, he jested, "Are you getting used to sniffing my handkerchief so far?" Caught off guard, Shen Zichuan clenched his hands, leaving red marks on his fingertips. Xiao Qie sized up the beauty under the lantern. He looked as the latter forcibly braced himself to put on a calm front, then at his reddened fingertips. Finally, he pointed to his own ear and said in a wicked tone, "Lanzhao, you're blushing." Chapter 45 New Blade. Chapter 45 New Blade Blush. Shen Zichuan's heart was originally as still as deep waters, but at this moment, even he was shaken by that word. Xiao Qie's handkerchief, which lay in his sleeve pocket, was like a fire that had been stuffed within. It inexplicably obeyed Xiao Qie's commands and sent the flames burning all the way up to his ears. He knew that the slight redness flushed on the snowy paleness of his skin was particularly striking. Even if he denied it, it would convince no one. He seemed to be caught by Xiao Qie in a certain predicament where bright mirrors surrounded them on all sides. The way Xiao Qie looked was as if he wanted his true colors to be revealed, and his protective shell to be cast aside. Shen Zichuan licked his lips to get rid of the troubling dryness. He balled up his fists and ignored such a provocation from Xiao Qie, refusing to give Xiao Qie a chance to pry further. "It's time to sleep," Shen Zichuan declared. "Let's call for them." Xiao Qie felt Shen Zichuan's "I'm ignoring you" reaction to be like a scratch that tickled him so suggestively that it stirred up his desire to press home the attack after his victory. However, if he were to emerge victorious, he could not rush it. Impulsiveness would only make it easy for him to fall into traps. So he let him off this time and said, "Both Shifu have their own arrangements, so there's no need to worry about them. If you want to sleep, the east wing has been vacated." Shen Zichuan stood up right away. Ji Gang and Zhou Qianqiu were so dead drunk that they were still not sober the next day. Shen Zichuan carried Ji Gang onto the carriage and took him back. Xiao Qie watched the carriage ride away and said to Chen Yang, "Keep your eyes closely on the 8 great clans these 2 days. See who's on the move." Chen Yang nodded in acknowledgement of his order. Accompanied by the swaying of the carriage, Shen Zichuan closed his eyes and rested. The carriage made a detour, and midway through the journey, they swapped to an unremarkable horse cart before arriving at Zhao Zui Temple. Qiao Tianya carried Ji Gang on his back and followed Shen Zichuan into the courtyard. Gu Qingqing had been waiting for a long while. When he saw them, he hurriedly stepped forward to receive them. "It's all right," Shen Zichuan assured. "Shifu is just drunk." Grand Mentor Qi, who was standing under the eaves, instructed, Ching Ching, help Ji Gang inside and let him sleep it off. Gu Ching Ching took Ji Gang from Shen Zichuan and carried him into the house. Xiao Tianya strode forward in a few steps, went on his knees in the snow, and asked, "Has Grand Mentor been doing well?" "All is well upon seeing you." Grand Mentor Qi lifted his hand and said, "Now that you have already changed your name to Xiao Tianya, that indenture one is no longer of any use, yet you are willing to stay for that bit of sentiment. I should thank you." To Grand Mentor Qi, what happened in the past was merely an effortless lift of your finger. But to me it was a kindness that saved my life. The merriment on Xiao Tianya's face vanished. He added, "During the year of Yongyi, too, when Emperor Guangqing had corrupt officials killed, my father and brother were both framed by others. If Grand Mentor had not been judicious and discerning enough to offer a helping hand, the 20 lives of the Qiao clan would have died unjust deaths before the Meridian Gate. 3. Your father and brother were both honest and upright subjects. It was just a brief moment of misjudgment that they were wrongly accused. Even without me they would still be safe and sound." Grand Mentor Qi replied. Xiao Tianya paused for a long while before he professed, "The Qiao clan cannot thank Grand Mentor enough for his kindness." During the years of Yongyi, when Xiao Tianya's father still served as an official in the Ministry of War, Emperor Guangqing was tough on corruption. Senior Qiao, having been reported by others, was found by the Chief Surveillance Bureau to be in the possession of properties and lands of unidentified origins. While he was helpless against accusations, Qi Huilian reinvestigated the case and freed Senior Qiao and a few others from the Ministry of War. Consequently, Qi Huilian married off his daughter to the eldest son of the Qiaos. Yet, this was not the end of the matter. A few years later, the Eastern Palace was falsely accused, and Qi Huilian was demoted from the Grand Mentor to a commoner. The same time when he followed the Crown Prince into Zhaozi Temple, Senior Qiao defected to the Empress Dowager. The Eastern Palace fell. Empress Dowager Hua had its remnants thoroughly investigated using Pan Rugi's authority of office in endorsing memorials for and Emperor Guangqing's name. As a result, Senior Qiao was thrown into prison again. This time, without Grand Mentor Qi as his guarantor, both he and his eldest son were beheaded. The rest of the Qiao household were banished to Suatian Pass. Qi Huilian's daughter died on the way. She was Xiao Tianya's eldest sister-in-law. "Let us not bring up the past." Grand Mentor Qi tugged on his snow-white hair and spoke, "It was not easy for you to be freed of the underclass status. 5. But you must think it through. Once you become subjected to Lanzhou, it will be a lifelong commitment. You will no longer be in control of your life or death." Xiao Tianya's hair fluttered in the wind. His smile was unruly and unrestrained. He said, "Grand Mentor, I already have no home to return to. In this lifetime, I've repeatedly received favors from both you and eldest sister-in-law. These were originally sinful debts that I had no way of repaying. Now that I can be of use, I shall dedicate my life to Master." Qiao Songyue died with eldest sister-in-law in the Tsang Commandery. The Qiao Tianya of today is merely a blade. There is no life nor death, let alone freedom, in a blade. Since this is a dark time when evil powers hang over us like overcast clouds that make the road you walk difficult, then pull out this blade that is myself and use it as you please." Grand Mentor Qi slowly walked out. Holding the pillar for support, he looked towards Shun Zichuan and said, "Lanzhou, this year is about to end. Teacher has yet to give you a gift for your coming of age." 6 Shun Zichuan's sleeves were blown apart by the breeze. He had a feeling of what was to come. Grand Mentor Qi said, "You can face everything head-on by yourself now. But this road will be long. Killing the sworn enemies, demolishing the 8 great clans, overturning the past trials, and bringing peace to Zhongbua. None of it is easy. Ji Gang will give you a blade, so will I. Receive it well." Flurries of snow drifted down in the inner court. Shun Zichuan lowered his head and let Grand Mentor Qi lay cold fingers on top of his hair. Ji Gang woke up when it was time for dinner. He had some kanji before he called Shun Zichuan into the house. Do you still remember the blade I mentioned to you the last time? It was delivered last night. It's been on my mind since. Ji Gang shifted aside the shelf inside the house to reveal a blade stand in the back. The first time Shun Zichuan saw this blade, his heart stirred. He could no longer move his eyes away. Ji Lei cannot use it. Ji Gang used a clean handkerchief to wipe at the blade's edge slowly, but this blade suits you very well. I had someone reforge the sheath. Its past name cannot be used anymore. You should give it another name yourself. Still engrossed in the blade's luster, Shun Zichuan studied it with fascination. The straight blade of almost 3 7/10 chi 7 meant that its unsheathing had to be sufficiently fast. Its width of 2 fingers would make swift attacks especially easy to maneuver. The hilt, made of sandalwood, was also newly forged. There was no decorative carving on it. Only the top was plated in gold with a white pearl embedded within. This was an excellent blade that had been thoroughly tempered. Even after having been shelved and forgotten for so long, it still cut an imposing, grim presence when unsheathed. It was as if it were immersed in the clear waters of autumn. Not only was it pristine and untainted, but it also carried with it an air of solitary haughtiness. Shifu has recently been pondering over a matter. It was only when I saw Xiao'er last night that I realized I have been too inflexible in my teachings, that you have become a little too overcautious and hesitant. Ji Gang laid down the handkerchief and said, once you wield this blade, even Xiao'er's Longli blade will not be able to match its speed. The sandalwood hilt is sufficiently light and will allow you to be more agile. Of all martial arts in this world, speed is the only thing that cannot be defeated. This is my father's beloved blade. When it comes to the Ji clan's martial arts, we now say that one has to be firm and ferocious. But the Ji clan's mental technique was founded and created by my father. What worked for him will surely work for you. You can take a different approach and blaze out a new trail as well. Shun Zichuan held the hilt of the blade and lifted it. Give it a name. Ji Gang retreated several steps aside. Shun Zichuan held it lovingly, unwilling to let go, and asked, Shifu would give me a blade of this caliber? Ji Gang laughed heartily and said, Shifu wants to box. I don't like using blades. This blade would be wasted if I didn't give it to you. Shun Zichuan thought for a while, then said, Then I shall change its name to Yang Shan Shui. In the evening, Grand Mentor Qi sat on his heels across the table. He wrote down the surnames of all the 8 great clans on a piece of paper. It will soon be the feast of 100 officials. The 4 great generals will soon be reunited, and the regional officials will be returning as well. Letting the ink dry, Grand Mentor Qi spoke, with the ascension of the new emperor, there will surely be surveillance next year. This matter is of utmost importance and is tied to the political stability during the year of Xianyang. Everyone will use the feast of 100 officials and the annual leave as an opportunity to reassess the situation in court. If Empress Dowager wants to stage a comeback and return to power, she will definitely not let this opportunity slip. After the death of Hua Xiqian, the Empress Dowager has been restrained inside the palace and has not shown her face since. The younger generation of the Hua clan has been demoted and banished. If she wants to make a move now, she could only use external help. Shun Zichuan furrowed his brows. But with the failing precedence of Shi Guan, who would still dare to act rashly and be the Empress Dowager's accomplice? Cowardly rats will not achieve greatness. All collaborations in this world are motivated by mutual benefit. As long as the Empress Dowager still holds the bargaining chips, why would she worry about finding a new ship to board? Grand Mentor Qi drew a few strokes under Hua on the paper and continued, Moreover, the men in her clan cannot be depended on. You've forgotten. It is a woman that the Empress Dowager has been personally mentoring. The third Missy. Shun Zichuan said, Teacher is referring to Hua Xiangyi. Given the height of her favors while Emperor Xiando was still alive, Hua III was going to be conferred the title of Princess of Dezhou. Grand Mentor Qi said, but she eventually did not become the Princess of Dezhou. It was not because Emperor Xiando was stingy, but because the Empress Dowager would not allow it. Shen Zichuan sipped a mouthful of tea and contemplated for a moment. Swallowing the tea, he said, I understand now. Then let us hear your thoughts on it. Shen Zichuan propped his arm on his knee and said, if Hua Xiangyi had become the Princess of Dazhou, then her marriage would be out of the Empress Dowager's hands. The marriage of a princess is a state affair, subject to the discretionary choice of the emperor and the court officials. But if she remains as the third Missy, then only the Empress Dowager has a say in whom she will be married off to. In that case, teacher, does the Empress Dowager want to marry her off? If the mountain does not come to me, then I will go to the mountain. Grand Mentor Qi dipped his brush in ink. The Empress Dowager has forsaken a chariot to save the general. 8. Losing Shiguan means that she has lost control of military power in Kudu, but if Hua Xiangyi marries Shao Qie, then this matter will be easily resolved. Shen Zichuan lightly tapped on his teacup. Holding the cup, he lowered his eyes and said, this is harder than ascending the heavens. Shao'er will never hand over his power. I have heard that Hua Xiangyi's beauty could make an entire city swoon. There is no guarantee that Shao'er would not change his mind if lust overcomes him. Grand Mentor Qi commented pointedly. Shen Zichuan held a mouthful of tea in his mouth and did not say a word. Grand Mentor Qi said, but this is indeed not easy to do. Even if Shao'er had the heart to do so, Shao Jiming would not sit idly and let him. The Hua clan and the Shao clan are like fire and water who cannot mix. There is no reason to bury the hatchet and make peace when the advantage is on their side. Shen Zichuan gave it some thought and said, losing military power but having the central administration in his control is a good choice as well. But at this time, there are barely any exceptional up-and-coming officials. Hai Liangyi still heads the Grand Secretariat, and the Empress Dowager cannot lower Hua Xiangyi's status and have her become a concubine. Then, there is no other fitting candidate for a groom in all of Kudu. If there isn't any in Kudu, she can look elsewhere. Grand Mentor Qi wrote the word Qidong and said, Libei won't do, but there is still an opportunity in Qidong. Commander Qi and Lu Guangbai have both yet to marry. Shen Zichuan said, then it can only be Lu Guangbai. However, the Lu clan are long-time close friends with the Shao clan. Theirs is by no means a relationship one can drive a wedge between overnight. Why didn't you put your guess on the Qi clan? Grand Mentor Qi said with dissatisfaction. Other than Qi Juin, the Qi clan still has one more person. It can't be. Shen Zichuan looked astonished. A few days later, Shao Qie accompanied Li Jianheng outside the city to welcome the two Qidong commanders-in-chief. Lu Guangbai returned with him. On the way, he removed his helmet and said, I heard some news during the journey. Do you know about it? Shao Qie spurred his horse forward and asked, what? Before Lu Guangbai got his chance to speak, Qi Juin spurred her horse towards them from behind and slapped him on the back. Commander! Lu Guangbai yelled in pain. Qi Juin rarely looked unhappy. She grabbed her blade and leaned forward to ask Shao Qie, when did these rumors spread in Kudu? Shao Qie was even more confused. Qi Juin clenched her teeth and fumed, someone is going to be my stepmother. 9. Stunned, Shao Qie said, old Commander Qi wants to take a new concubine? Concubine. Qi Juin sneered derisively. They're already saying that he's going to take a second wife. Third Missy Hua is going to be my stepmother. Is she even my age? Chapter 46, Banquet. Chapter 46. Banquet. Hua Xiangyi was indeed not as old as Qi Juin. She was younger than Qi Juin by 2 years. Having been kept deep in the inner palace these days, she had thinned down a lot. Realization dawned on her when she saw Qi Xiu's portrait on the table in front of the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager held her hand and grasped it for a long time before saying, it's a May-December marriage, but Qi Xiu will still dote on you. Hua Xiangyi touched the purple palace robe and laid her head on the Empress Dowager's knee. The Empress Dowager stroked her long hair and said, "There's no need to feel aggrieved. All of Hua clan's daughters are married away like this. A few years after you marry him, you will become the bona fide mistress of the Qidong 5 commanderies." After lighting the incense in the palace hall, Matron Liuxiang wordlessly motioned for all the maids and eunuchs to leave. Hua Xiangyi smiled and said, "I just can't bear to leave you, Aunt. Songjuan Commandery is so far away, I'll have to wait a year if I wish to see you again." "Aunt can't bear to leave you either." The Empress Dowager hugged her gently. Hua Xiangyi snuggled against her like she did when she was little, listening as the Empress Dowager said, "When I married Emperor Guangqing, I was only 15. That year I left Yiqing. The one thing I couldn't bear parting with the most was my family's swing. I liked sitting on it. With each swing in the wind, I could hear the clamor beyond those high walls. My mother coaxed me and told me that after I came to the imperial palace of Kudu, the emperor would build me an identical swing as long as I wanted it." Hua Xiangyi stayed still and silent. The Empress Dowager was the person most favored by Emperor Guangqing, yet what Emperor Guangqing gave was not what the Empress Dowager wanted. The moment she set foot into Kudu, she discovered that all the doting her husband showered on her was merely fleeting, like the clouds in the sky. She had to vie endlessly with countless women in the harem just for that one moment of joy. In Kudu, the most worthless thing of all was love. The Empress Dowager patted Hua Xiangyi's head and said, "Since I came to Kudu, 37 years have already passed by in a blink. Now my little baby niece is also to be wedded. I've really grown old. In Kudu, I realize that men are powerful in this world because they can take the imperial exams and serve as officials to rise in rank. They can also ride horses into battles whilst wielding spears. Us women are taken into ladies' chambers and taught virtue and precepts. No matter how talented and intelligent you are with a thirst for knowledge, there will come a time when you have to eventually marry." The Empress Dowager's eyes were calm. "When Father taught me, he said that in this world, he and the Emperor would be the sky above my head. How ridiculously funny. Becoming the Empress means that I share the empire equally with the Emperor. Who could be the sky above my head? No one. My brothers at home are all useless and muddle-headed. Generation after generation, the Hua clan can only rely on marrying off daughters to keep up the appearance of an affluent clan, yet we aren't allowed to make a single complaint. What kind of kinship is this? Since the world wants to differentiate between the strong and weak to determine success and failure, then I, too, can emerge victor." The Empress Dowager stroked Hua Xiangyi's temples. "Remember this. This time, it is not Qi Shiyu who chose you but you who chose him. I may be defeated in the days to come, but it certainly won't be now. My baby niece is going to Qidong not because there is no other option, but to bide your time and ready yourself for action. No matter what happens in the future, you may sigh, but you must never wallow in self-resentment and self-pity. In this game of chess with the world at stake, one can only make a move with no regret. Since we are surrounded and eyed by a pack of wolves with no way of escape, then we shall fight them to the bitter end." The bamboo tube in the palace hall swung lightly. Hua Xiangyi slowly grasped the Empress Dowager's hand back. "I will not forget Aunt's teachings." The feast of 100 officials was on Yuanchun one night. Local officials entered the capital one after another. There were a lot fewer family feasts and banquets this year, as they all knew that Hai Liangyi was keeping a close watch on them. Even coming together in great numbers could turn into evidence of clique forming. It had not been long since Li Jianheng's ascension to the throne. Everyone all wanted to use the feast of 100 officials as an opportunity to observe this new master of theirs. They still did not know which way the wind was blowing in Kudu, so everyone spoke and acted with prudence. Only the matter of Hua III spread like wildfire, leaving Qi Juin with nowhere else to vent her unhappiness. Shao Qie was still secretly investigating the 8 great clans in recent days, but this matter had also piqued his interest. It just happened that Xiao Jiming had entered the capital, so both brothers had a chat in the residence. The Hua clan wants to rise again from the ashes. No matter how much of a lecher old Commander Qi is, he must not agree to this marriage. Xiao Qia said offhandedly as he took out Libei Armored Cavalry's current year expenditure accounts for a look. That's really hard to say. Xiao Jiming sat at the table and flipped through the military affairs. Xiao Qia raised his eyes and asked, how would this benefit his Qidong? Xiao Jiming endorsed the document with his name and said, you're in Kudu, and you have taken over the 8 Great Training Divisions. Haven't you checked the 8 Great Training Divisions accounts? Xiao Qia responded, I took a look at the account when the Court of Judicial Review was purged. The surplus money and military provisions from the 8 Great Training Divisions were all supplied to the Imperial Army this year to make up for the shortfall. What's wrong? Xiao Jiming pondered over the document for a moment and said, when Hua Xiqian was still alive, the annual salary and provisions for the 8 Great Training Division was several times higher than that of the Bianjuan Commandery. The money that Shi Guan couldn't account for, where could it have gone? Since Hua Xiqian could have 2 accounts for one payment, then couldn't the Empress Dowager have kept another account book? Money comes and goes like flowing water, but the audit remains a constant. As long as he could swap the auditing official to his own and place the said official right under the 8 Great Training Divisions' noses, they could write the account book in any way they so desire every year. The Hua clan's properties have been searched and their possessions confiscated. But who would dare to touch the Empress Dowager's private coffers? This money is now Hua Xiangyi's dowry. Whether it's for official or personal reasons, Qi Xiu ought to be tempted. Looking displeased, Xiao Qia said, the current commander-in-chief of Qidong 5 Commandery's military forces is Qi Zhuyin. Qi Zhuyin will not agree to it. Even so, Xiao Jiming finally looked at Xiao Qia. She can't stop it. Xiao Qia lay down and thought for a while before saying, all these years, the Qi clan has had a pretty good relationship with us. If Qi Xiu really marries Hua III, Li Bei will no longer be Qidong's buddy. That's of little importance. Once the Bianxia 12 tribes come attacking, everyone still has to fight side by side. Xiao Jiming said, with Hua III, the Qidong 5 Commandery's garrison troops will have money. Then tell them to buy Li Bei's horses in the future. There was a cold, tough glint in Xiao Qia's eyes. How long can the Empress Dowager's private coffer last? Providing for 200,000 soldiers is not as simple as raising 20 dogs. The consumption of military expenditure is alarming. It's definitely not something a single person can sustain. If the Empress Dowager has the Qi clan to assist her, then the impasse in Kudu can be broken. Xiao Jiming said, once power returns to her hand, she will be able to recoup the money. Xiao Qia sat up again and said, this marriage must not come to pass. Xiao Jiming said, there's still a way. Xiao Qia looked towards him and said, the easiest is to kill Hua III. Xiao Jiming looked at him in surprise and said, you are also a thorn in others' flesh now. The 8 Great Clan will only be too anxious for you to make a move. Xiao Qia said, rumors are rife now. If we try to stop it after the new year, it'd be too late. Xiao Jiming pondered it over in silence. After a while, he said, if the Empress Dowager wants to put this marriage together, then she must show herself, and the Feast of 100 Officials is her only opportunity. This matter is of great importance. Hai Liangyi might not necessarily be willing to let it happen. When the time comes, there will be a war of words. The Hua clan has 3 generations of daughters who were married away to Qidong. If we were to delve into it seriously, then Hua III might really turn out to be Qi Xiu's distant blood relative. Xiao Qia set aside the book and suddenly burst out laughing. No. I want Hua III to become a distant blood relative of Qi Xiu. This marriage must not come to pass. Xiao Qia got up and pushed the door open to call for Zhao Hui. It's the spring festival. Xiao Qia said. You still have yet to see your younger sister. Zhao Hui looked at Xiao Jiming, who smiled faintly. Zhao Hui understood and said, "I'll pay her a visit tomorrow morning." Han Qing, the new commander-in-chief of the imperial bodyguards, was the third son of lawful birth from the Han clan, one of the 8 great clans. He used to be the assistant commander of the 8 great training divisions. During the Nanlin hunt, he happened to be on a break. He did not follow Shi Guan, nor did he heed the Empress Dowager's instructions. Rumor had it that he was still asleep when the imperial army knocked on his door. As such, he escaped the autumn wind too that had purged the Hua faction. But Shen Zichuan knew that this man was someone Xue Xiuzhua had planted there. On the eve of the feast of 100 officials, the imperial bodyguards sorted out their duty arrangements. According to the plan, Shen Zichuan had to remain before the emperor, so it came as no surprise when he got the waist token. Han Cheng personally delivered the waist token to Shen Zichuan. Both men were inside the imperial bodyguard's office. He said, "Everything is in order except the easterly wind. 3 When the time comes, I'll be at the side too. No matter what, His Majesty mustn't be hurt." "Of course." Shen Zichuan hung up the waist token and said with a smile, "This time, we will be depending on His Excellency the Commander-in-Chief." Han Qing felt apprehensive, but it would not do for him to reveal it. So he could only repeat, "If this matter fails and gets exposed, you and I will be sentenced to death for this crime. But if it succeeds, then the imperial bodyguards will be able to swipe a slice of the pie from the hands of the imperial army. Everyone will live well from then on, and good days will be upon us. Please rest assured, Your Excellency," Shen Zichuan said with a serious expression. "We brothers are of one mind. Nothing will go wrong." Seeing how composed and confident he was, Han Qing breathed a sigh of relief. Outside, the snow fell increasingly harder. Even by the time it was dawn, it never stopped. Before the feast of 100 officials, there was a sacrificial ceremony. For the imperial army was already on the alert and ready for battle early in the morning. Xiao Qie was neatly dressed in his court attire today. When he strode through the palace gates, he came face to face with Han Qing. Just as he was exchanging conventional greetings with the latter, he saw Shen Zichuan. "The left guard stands guard before the emperor," Xiao Qie asked Han Qing, as he looked at Shen Zichuan and pretended not to be acquainted with the latter. "So why is it assigned to imperial bodyguards of the company commander rank and below? The imperial bodyguards have now been reorganized, and many positions have been left vacant," Han Qing said and looked back. "The ones who were picked are all first-rate experts. Many of them are disadvantaged by the fact that the year for promotion is not upon them yet, so they all seem to be of junior positions." Xiao Qie was on guard when he saw Shen Zichuan. But even if he could suppress the imperial bodyguards a notch, he did not have the authority to command the other party to swap the men. Because no matter how much the imperial bodyguards was inhibited, both it and the Eastern Depot took commands directly from the emperor. As long as Li Jianheng said nothing, anyone else who gave orders summarily would be overstepping their authority. As if knowing what he was thinking, Shen Zichuan exchanged glances with him with eyes that spoke of a meaning Xiao Qie could not read. Ahead of them, the domesticated elephant's office had already herded the elephants out. Li Jianheng was about to step out of the hall soon. Unable to stay for long, Xiao Qie strode forward and left. This was the first time Li Jianheng held the ceremonial greatsword in his hands. It was so heavy he almost could not lift it. Even before he stepped out of the palace doors, he already felt his neck aching with that royal crown atop his head. This coronation attire, 5 which had him shouldering the sun and the moon and bearing the stars on his back, 6 finally revealed in him a trace of sober, imposing bearing from his typical gleeful and playful attitude. Li Jianheng's palms were sweating. He held up the greatsword before striding out of the door. The court elephants, draped with red velvet and gold saddles, stood at both sides. The various officials kowtowed and shouted out wishes of longevity upon the emperor. Li Jianheng stood atop the stairs, his broadened field of vision taking in the panorama of thick clouds in the east, with skies and lands cloaked in a blanket of boundless snow. He stood up high above, so high it was almost as if he was up there in the clouds. The deafening sounds of "Long live, Your Majesty" reverberated in his ears. Li Jianheng's heartbeat quickened. Pleasant surprise gradually washed over his face as his eyes successively moved down from Hai Liangyi to Shao Jiming to all living beings in the world kneeling before him. He was the one and only supreme ruler. This is how it feels like to be the emperor. Li Jianheng could not help but grasp the greatsword tightly. In this grand show of obeisances made to him, he felt as if he had obtained the strength and courage to contend with heaven. This feeling was poles apart from the feeling of sitting in the imperial court. It was the thrill of being kowtowed to for the first time ever since the hunting ground. Li Jianheng advanced along the long stairs and walked towards the ceremonial terrace. He walked very, very slowly, reveling in this entire journey of honor and glory. Of the tens of thousands of people, only Shen Zichuan slowly raised his head. He looked along the tall stairs past Li Jianheng's figure, where he, too, saw the dark and gloomy sky amidst the dancing snow. As the feast began, the court of imperial entertainments began to dish out meals, while the imperial winery followed on their heels to serve wine without pause. Li Jianheng was fond of sweets, so the imperial bakery made quite a number of silk-nested tiger's eye candies. Li Jianheng sat on the dragon throne, with the Empress Dowager and Hua Xiangyi below him, followed by Muru, who had just been conferred the title of imperial concubine. Shen Zichuan and Han Qing stood at the bottom of the steps, opposite the imperial army. A eunuch from the imperial food service kneeled behind Shen Zichuan to the right. Every dish on Li Jianheng's table had to be first tasted by the imperial food service eunuch. Li Jianheng was in high spirits tonight. He repeatedly urged all those present to drink up, while he himself was somewhat intoxicated. Sitting on top, he said, "Ever since I've ascended to the throne, I've been fortunate to be assisted by wise talents. With a clear mirror 7 like Secretariat Elder Hai by my side, there isn't a day I dare to forget to self-reflect." He began to shoot his mouth off as soon as he drank too much. "I'm very grateful to Secretariat Elder Hai, and I wish to regard Secretariat Elder Hai as the second father 8 of the court. Such honor and glory have never been accorded to past Secretariat Elders before. Now I shall give Secretariat Elder, second father." How could he speak of such words? The way he put it drained the color from Hai Liangyi's face. Hai Liangyi had already got up in astonishment, wanting to kneel in protest. At the same time, Li Jianheng belched from the wine, still waving his hand. "No need for Secretariat Elder to panic. It's what I should do. I think this is improper." The Empress Dowager looked at Hai Liangyi and paused for a moment. It was as if she saw through Hai Liangyi's shock at that very moment. Turning to Li Jianheng, she said softly, "Secretariat Elder Hai is the leader revered by all scholars in the world. His character is solemn and dignified. Since entering the court to serve as an official, he has had clean hands. He speaks bluntly and resolutely. If His Majesty were to equate this kind of trusted aid to a second father, then even if this would demonstrate Your Majesty's favor, the Secretariat Elder's intent to criticize social evils of the times for public interests would be lost." Seeing the Empress Dowager's mild demeanor, Li Jianheng laughed and said, "In the past, King Xiang 9 valued relationships and respected Fan Xing 10 as his second father. Today, I want to express my gratitude for Secretariat Elder's assistance too, and address him as second father. It sounds intimate, and the title itself would give me pause for self-reflection. Secretariat Elder, so how about it?" Hai Liangyi, already kowtowing, said, "This absolutely mustn't be done." It was as if Li Jianheng was splashed in the face with cold water. That sternly uttered phrase of "mustn't be done" put a damper on his enthusiasm, making him displeased. His expression underwent a few changes before he eventually forced a smile and said, It's just a form of address for me to be on more intimate terms with the Secretariat Elder. So what does it matter? Hai Liangi said, Your Majesty is the sovereign, poles apart from an overlord 11 confined to a narrow corner. This old subject was born in the mountain ridges of Huzhou. I'm truly nothing but an uncouth, lowly person. How can I share the same address of father as the sagely Emperor Guangqing? Li Jianheng's original intention was to win over the hearts of Hai Liangi as well as all the scholars in the world. He wanted to use this to affirm that he was not an idiot who disrespected learning. But that was all the few books he had read. How could he have known that a mere address could evoke such vehement rejection from Hai Liangi? He had no way to back down this very moment, like a man who found it difficult to dismount a tiger he had ridden. 12 He even sobered up a few degrees. Li Jianheng could not bring himself to insist on it and embarrass himself further, so he thought of playing dumb and glossing it over. Thus, he said, if the Secretariat Elder is unwilling, then forget it. My thinking is that, Hai Liangi said, those at the bottom will imitate the propensity of those at the top. Now that His Majesty has created this precedent tonight, then there will be people who will attempt to follow suit in the future. When that happens, they will collude to form cliques and factions that impede the imperial court, thereby jeopardizing the entire state. It has only been a month since the dust from the Hua faction case settled. Past experiences, if not forgotten, will serve as a guide for the future. It's truly improper for Your Majesty to drink until dead drunk tonight. Li Jianheng clenched the wine cup tightly in his hands and surveyed the crowd below. It was only when he saw the officials hanging their heads low and not daring to look directly at him that his fury eased off some. He could not flare up at Hai Liangi, but he did not want to admit the errors of his way today either. He sat restlessly on this dragon throne. Having tasted the sweetness of submission from all living beings, how could he willingly open himself up to censure? He was the emperor. Li Jianheng's eyes were already bloodshot from enduring it. He drank the last mouthful of wine and said, Let's drop this matter. Help Secretariat Elder back to his seat. Hai Liangi was aware that tonight was not the time to admonish him, but it was hard to change his frank and outspoken nature. I still have something to say. Li Jianheng pursed his lips into a tight line and said nothing. Silence reigned in the banquet hall. Without getting a response, Hai Liangi continued to kneel in place. They were now at a deadlock. No one else touched their chopsticks. Even the music from the reed instruments had ceased. Suddenly, a clack rang out. Xiao Qia laid down his chopsticks at his own seat and laughed out loud. It delights me to see the relationship between Li Jianheng and Secretariat Elder. The so-called sagely ruler and virtuous subject is nothing more than precisely this, with the emperor and his subjects in harmonious council on state affairs, so the ancient saying goes. The presence of such a sagely ruler and upstanding official in Dazhou means that the age of prosperity is sure to fall upon us soon. It's the blessing of the officials that His Majesty advocates freedom of speech and is receptive to criticisms. Shuexiuzhua raised his cup for a toast. It's the new year tonight. Why not offer a toast to this sacred scene? The group of officials lifted their cups and said their greetings in unison. Li Jianheng felt a little appeased amidst the sounds of greetings and wishes. On seeing a still kneeling Hai Liangi, he could not refrain from letting loose a sigh. Secretariat Elder, please rise. With the crisis averted, the Empress Dowager looked at Xiao Qia for a moment before she prompted. It's said that a man's lifelong wish to start a family and establish one's career. Does Su An have a betrothal candidate in mind? There was a flash in Shen Zichuan's eyes as he looked towards Xiao Qia too. Xiao Qia smiled without the slightest scruple and answered, To reply, Your Majesty, which of the noble ladies in Kudu would be willing to marry down to me the way I am now? Besides, it's not my aspiration to settle down. The Empress Dowager said, The Viceroy is too humble. Up-and-coming upstarts in the capital are few and far between nowadays. With your appearance, there will be beauties beckoning to you even when you cross the bridge on the eastern street. Hereditary prince, if you don't urge him, it may then be too late. Xiao Jiming smiled too and replied, My dear father at home thinks his temperament is still volatile. He's afraid he would hold up the marriage and life of a maiden from some family. The Empress Dowager turned her head aside once again and looked at Li Jianheng with a smile. Look at how not a single one of them is in a hurry. When the Prince of Libei was at this age, he was already married for 3 to 4 years. Li Jianheng had not come around from the previous situation, and he was feeling a little lackadaisical at the moment. Not daring to leave the Empress Dowager hanging, he glanced at Xiao Qie and replied, Mother may not be aware, Su-an is reckless in nature. The common noble lady from Kudu will not be able to hold their own against him. You can't put it this way and delay his marriage for no good reason. The Empress Dowager continued, It doesn't have to be a noble lady from Kudu. I'm aware that Marquis Hulian's daughter, Commandery Princess 13 Zhaoyue, is of similar age with Sun. It's a good match. Marquis Helian was the Marquis of Chuanqing. He was a member of the Fei clan, which was one of the 8 great clans. The Empress Dowager had indeed appointed a marriage 14 well-matched in status. Marquis Helian, Fei Kuan, promptly gave a toast and looked in Xiao Jiming's direction. Xiao Qie thought that the Empress Dowager would talk about Hua Xiangyi's marriage at the banquet. He did not expect the discussion this time to come directly for him instead. Outright rejection was not an option, but neither could he marry straight off in a muddle. Li Jianheng was caught off guard too. Dazed for a moment, he looked at Xiao Qie and stuttered, Commandery Princess Zhaoyue, struck by a brainwave, he said, the nation is still in mourning. I'm afraid it's not appropriate to appoint marriage at this time. It's one thing to pledge marriage and another to complete the marriage. We have not been having any good times lately. We could fix the betrothal first and wait for summertime to seek an auspicious day to hold the rites for the union. The Empress Dowager added affectionately, Zhaoyue and Xiangyi are bosom friends. It'd be perfect for them to get married at the same time. She remained tight-lipped about who Hua Xiangyi was going to marry and merely pushed Commandery Princess Zhaoyue to Xiao Qie. This made it clear that she regarded Xiao Qie's marriage as a state affair and Hua Xiangyi's marriage as a private matter. Qi Zhuin's expression was solemn, but unexpectedly enough, she said nothing. Seeing this, Lu Guangbai knew that it did not bode well and guessed that Qi Xiu had already given his approval and told Qi Zhuin not to say anything. However, getting married to Commandery Princess Zhaoyue was absolutely out of the question. If this marriage was decided and the Empress Dowager lifted Zhaoyue's status to princess, Xiao Qie would be marrying a princess. The consort of Dazhou had no power, with only a title in name. It would strip Xiao Qie of his military power in Kudu, which he had only just grabbed onto. The wine in Xiao Qie's throat burned like a raging fire. He had already risen to his feet, but then he saw the Empress Dowager smiling again. The hereditary prince is married to the daughter of the Lu clan's Earl of Bianxia from the Bianjuan Commandery. Your little son is now around 4 to 5 years old, right? Xiao Jiming replied, He is now 4 years old. The grandson heir is already 4 years old, yet General Lu still does not have a wife. The Empress Dowager looked towards Lu Guangbai and added, Bianjuan is a desert land. It's not easy for the general to guard and defend it. Starting a family early will reduce one of the Earl of Bianxia's concerns. General Lu seems to me to be of similar age to the hereditary prince. Why? Is it also not the general's aspiration to start a family? Lu Guangbai was momentarily at a loss for words. To reply, Your Majesty, the Empress Dowager continued, Zhaoyue's disposition is lively and playful. Frankly speaking, Su-an is indeed quite reckless. The general seems a lot more reliable instead. Su-an, what do you think about it? If Xiao Qie did not marry Commandery Princess Zhaoyue, it would fall upon Lu Guangbai to marry her. This headache laid out in the banquet was precisely meant to put him in a dilemma. Xiao Qia had already sent Zhao Hui to bribe someone from the Ministry of Rites. Once Her Majesty opened her mouth tonight, he would testify to the fact that Hua Xiangyi was Qi Shiyu's distant relative related by blood. With the law of propriety in the way and a wide gap in seniority, this marriage would fall apart. But the Empress Dowager would not give him the chance to counter at all. Who would have guessed that it would be his marriage that would be handed over tonight? It was at this moment Xiao Qia saw the look in Shen Zichuan's eyes. As both men stood under the watchful gaze of everyone present with this thorny issue pressing down upon them, their eyes met for the briefest flicker of an instant. Xiao Qia strode a step forward and said, "To reply, Your Majesty." The Imperial Food Service eunuch was transferring dishes on behalf of the Imperial Bakery. He submissively divided out the portion he was to sample and picked up the chopsticks before looking at Li Jianheng, who was about an arm away from him. Li Jianheng was still undecided as he listened to their confrontation with a frown. Sensing the lack of movement from the eunuch near him, he cast a sidelong glance over and asked, "Why are you standing?" In the twinkling of an eye, the eunuch clenched the gold-clad chopsticks and, with a lightning move of his hand, stabbed it right towards Li Jianheng's neck. It happened so abruptly that Li Jianheng did not even have the time to react. All he could do was to watch helplessly as the tip of that chopstick came stabbing towards him. His entire body stiffened as his eyes betrayed the fear in them. He could not even move his fingers. In the split second the color drained from everyone's faces, Shen Zichuan had already drawn out Yang Shan Shui. The cold glint of the straight blade flashed past. Li Jianheng's throat tightened as he yelled as loud as he could. As soon as he did so, hot, fresh blood splattered onto the front and hem of his robe. Li Jianheng shouted at the top of his voice, "Protect me!" The eunuch's head rolled forward and fell onto Li Jianheng's body. Li Jianheng held on tightly to both sides of the dragon throne for support. Under this heavy stench of blood, he watched as someone caught hold of that headless body which was toppling over towards him. Shen Zichuan cast aside the body and turned around indifferently to command, "Protect His Majesty." Gu Qingqing immediately drew his sword. Snow-white glint cut through the air with a swish as the imperial bodyguards stood before the imperial army like a fortified, impregnable city, becoming Li Jianheng's primary shield. With the imperial bodyguards between them, Xiao Qia had to look up before he could see Shen Zichuan's face. The balanced status quo they had always maintained was finally shattered right this very moment. Shen Zichuan looked down at him from high above and threw him a meaningful smile. That expression in his eyes was as concrete as it could be as it trampled down upon Xiao Qia's chest. Chapter 47. Power Struggle. Chapter 47. Power Struggle. Terrified, Li Jianheng kicked that human head away with his leg shaking. He no longer cared about keeping up appearances. Right this moment, he wanted so much to shrink into the dragon throne. There was a roaring in his ears as he watched the fresh blood soak through his robe. It felt as though someone was strangling him by the throat. For a long time, he could not utter a single word. Shen Zichuan kneeled on one knee and said with a severe countenance, "Don't be afraid, Your Majesty. The assassin has already been executed. This humble subject was late in coming to your protection. For this sin, I deserve death." Li Jianheng's limbs seemed to be paralyzed as he struggled with the effort to grasp hold of the armrests of the throne and shift his gaze from the corpse to Shen Zichuan's face. He almost choked with sobs as he grabbed Shen Zichuan's sleeve and said, not late at all. You. Lanzhao, you've done well. I almost. Summon the imperial physician." Ignoring the bloody corpse, the Empress Dowager hurried over. She held Li Jianheng's hand and called out softly to him, "Your Majesty, Your Majesty?" Li Jianheng was still in a panic from the fear. He swallowed his saliva with some difficulty and hastily pulled out his hand from the Empress Dowager's palms to grasp Shen Zichuan's sleeve tightly. He pleaded, "Stay here. Lead the imperial bodyguards and remain here to protect me." The imperial bodyguards are His Majesty's guards, Shen Zichuan said without blinking an eye. For His Majesty, the imperial bodyguards will willingly brave through fire and water. This humble subject will immediately escort Your Majesty back to Mingli Hall. Everyone at the banquet was still badly shaken. Xue Xiuzhua took a few steps forward and said sharply, "Arrest and detain everyone from the Imperial Food Service, Court of Imperial Entertainments, Imperial Bakery, and Imperial Winery. To think there is an assassin hiding among the Son of Heaven's personal attendants. All those involved in the arrangements of the inner palace eunuchs and guards' defenses must be held accountable." "Who is in charge of patrols tonight?" the Empress Dowager asked. The banquet hall fell silent. Xiao Qia bowed and said, "To reply, Your Majesty, it's this subject." The Empress Dowager did not pursue further. Instead, she looked at Li Jianheng, as did the other officials. For this eunuch to be someone from the Imperial Food Service, he first had to have a clean family background and a clean history. The time he entered the palace, the services and offices among the 24 yamens he had worked in, and even which inner palace eunuchs he had been on good terms with in the past, all had to be investigated. Not only that, even the people he came into contact with had to be checked and recorded in the official files. Xiao Qia was responsible for the guards' defenses. He was supposed to vet all these matters thoroughly before the feast of 100 officials. The assassin had walked in through his layers of defenses. There was no way he could escape responsibility. With his lips pale as he dripped cold sweat, Li Jianheng said, "Take the eunuchs of the various services into custody first." Before he could finish his words, he fainted. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless one. Li Jianheng was lying unconscious in the inner room. The imperial physicians gathered in a group, while the Empress Dowager listened to their diagnosis behind the hanging curtain once more. Hai Liangyi waited on the side, as instructed explicitly by the Empress Dowager. Han Cheng led the imperial bodyguards to stand guard with their swords under the eaves, while the court officials kneeled outside. The night of Yuan Chunwan was incredibly cold. Many elderly officials were already shivering from the freezing cold, hanging on with their sheer will alone. The whole palace, shrouded in a particularly chilling atmosphere, was dead silent. Xiao Qia was not among them. He needed to arrest the inner palace eunuchs with the relevant personnel from the Ministry of Justice and the Chief Surveillance Bureau. Furthermore, the Imperial Army also had to be detained. The Imperial Army's assistant commander responsible for screening the manpower tonight had his waist token suspended. Together with the eunuchs, he was thrown into prison. There was no fire brazier set up inside the hall. Only the lanterns were lit. Xiao Qia was sitting on the lower right of the Minister of Justice, Kong Qiu. On the left was the Chief Surveillance Bureau's left Censor-in-Chief, Sun Yu, and right Censor-in-Chief, Fu Linye. If this had proceeded like before, Xiao Qia would have held the same authority as the Minister of Justice to conduct trials, which would have placed him on equal footing and seating as the latter. But this time, to avoid arousing suspicion, he could only make do with the lower right seating and hand the authority of supervision over to the two head officials from the Chief Surveillance Bureau. This year was a period of troubled times, where a fresh wave of problems rose before the former had subsided. The three judicial offices had never judged cases consecutively like this. What's more, all the cases were major ones that concerned the emperor's life. Kong Qiu finished the tea that had cooled and said nothing as they waited for the prisoner to be summoned. In fact, from the moment they had sat here, no one had dared to make small talk. Everyone knew that it was not the time to jest and joke around. All of them wore solemn expressions on their faces. Xiao Qia sat in his seat and rotated his thumb ring in silence as he lost himself in contemplation. They had come prepared for this case, just like Xia Fuzi's case back then. It became all the more convoluted in the instant it had occurred. If one could look beyond the facade the moment it happened, it would look like countless strings being pulled behind the scenes, concealing a deep-seated motive. The inner eunuchs from the imperial food service had to test the dishes for the Son of Heaven. As such, each one from top to bottom had been thoroughly vetted for all 3 generations. To use this kind of person and turn him into an assassin would be extremely difficult. Yet, it was also very easy. First of all, it must be someone who could come into contact with the inner palace eunuchs, or a eunuch who was hiding in the palace but working for powers on the outside. Only these 2 kinds of people could coerce or entice the eunuch into assassinating the emperor. Xiao Qie suddenly remembered something at this point and stopped turning his thumb ring. Right at this time, the summoned prisoner was brought over. It was the Imperial Army's assistant commander. Kong Qiu cut the crap and went straight to the point. As the Imperial Army's assistant commander, you are the one responsible for examining the armed staff of the Imperial Army who would stand before the Emperor tonight, as well as the eunuch the Imperial Food Service arranged to taste test the dishes. How much do you know about this eunuch? The name of the assistant commander was Meng Rue, a man from a military household. 2 Xiao Qie had promoted in the 6th year of Xianda. 3 He was a very prudent man who originally served as the office manager 4 in the Imperial Army. With a gaze that never wavered, he answered in a steady voice. The eunuch assassin went by the name Guisheng. He was 26 and a native of the city of Chunqing. His father, a resident of Baishui Street in Chunqing, passed away from illness in the 6th year of Xianda. As the only child in the family, Guisheng entered the palace in the year of Yongyi and had been here for 12 years since. He joined the Imperial Food Service in the 1st year of Xianda and started to taste dishes for the former emperor from the 4th year of Xianda onwards. He had no special hobbies, and there is hardly anyone he associated with. Kong Qiu thought for a moment and asked, "Who was the one who arranged for him to taste the dishes tonight?" Meng Rue answered, "The female official of the Imperial Food Service, Fuling." Kong Qiu first looked at the men from the Chief Surveillance Bureau, then at Xiao Qie before he nodded and said, "The weapon used for the assassination was the golden chopsticks used by the Emperor. The Imperial Army could do nothing about it even if they did a body search or a background check on him. How about this? Assistant Commander Meng, please wait for a moment. Summon Fuling of the Imperial Food Service." Meng Rue retreated to the side. From start to end, he never made eye contact with Xiao Qie. Xiao Qie was actually not as nervous as the others expected him to be. He knew fully well that this assassination could not strip him of his military power. Perhaps he would be punished and have his salary reduced after this incident, but these would not have any significant impact on him. When the incident happened, he was too far away. There was no way he could beat Shen Zichuan to it and save the emperor. Plus, the seating arrangement was planned according to the customs, so no one could criticize it either. And there was one more thing. That is, the speed at which Shen Zichuan had drawn his sword back then was simply too fast. In almost the blink of an eye, his blade had already returned to its sheath, and the assassin's head had toppled to the ground. This differed completely from the speed he had exhibited last time on that rainy night. Even if Xiao Qie had been standing beside him at the time of incident, he might not have necessarily been faster than him. But it was what was going to transpire after the assassination that bothered Xiao Qie the most. He had to plan ahead and save for a rainy day. He needed to curb the possibility of this matter burning its way to him. Xiao Qie thought again of that final expression in Shen Zichuan's eyes. The Imperial bodyguard's usual practice was to have a period of promotion once every 8 years. The subordinates would first be assigned to one of the 12 offices according to their household register classification, 5 then promoted according to their on-the-job performance. There were just too few opportunities for an exception to be made. Shen Zichuan's family background was unusual. Although he was now absolved from sin and exempted from punishment, he still could not be considered to have military status. If he wanted to lead and command the imperial bodyguards, then he had to find a way to get promoted. The reasons Xiao Qie had been suppressing the imperial bodyguards these few months were to consolidate the imperial army's influence and clout, and to guard against Shen Zichuan's advancements through the ranks. The situation in Kudu was chaotic, yet it was also as distinct as the waters of the Jing and Wei rivers. Everyone was already familiar with one another. All of them collaborated with one another for their own interests, then fought with each other for their own interests. Only Shen Zichuan was an unpredictable variable. Xiao Qie had tried every possible way to sound and feel him out, but he never found out what Shen Zichuan's actual intent was. If he could not figure out his motive, then he could not cooperate with him with peace of mind. Xiao Qie had hoped that Shen Zichuan could stay quietly at the bottom rank. But the assassination case this time was Shen Zichuan's answer. Impossible. He was his own blade. He would kill out a path for his own. He would not deign to be at the beck and call of others. He wanted to tear others apart, not to obey. What could a night of bedroom pleasure change? That was the howls of their resentment being vented in the pitch-dark night, a panting which stemmed from the entanglement of both men's desires. It was amidst the collision of bodies and pounding of flesh that gave rise to the feeling of fellow sufferers commiserating with one another. But this was still not enough to hamper both men from making the choices they did. Xiao Qie would never give up the power in his hands. This was the blade on which his survival depended. If he could not return to Libei, then he must grasp tightly onto this blade. Likewise, Shen Zichuan would not tolerate himself being subservient to others. He would not let others decide the course of his fate. He needed to rise through the ranks. He had to. Xiao Qie suddenly clenched his fist. Seeing that Shen Zichuan was involved in the plotting of this case, then who were his accomplices? Li Jianheng had yet to regain consciousness. Shen Zichuan was switched off duties so he could get a little rest. As he wiped his hands in the office, he heard the door behind him open, followed by someone entering. According to the plan you spoke of, Han Qing should be the one stepping forward to save the emperor. Xue Xiuzhua rolled up his sleeves a little and washed his hands in the cold water basin. He smiled and said, "The few of us brothers have been played for fools by your excellency Shen." The situation was critical. Shen Zichuan did not look back. If Han Qing has that ability, then it wouldn't matter to have him do the saving. But he just had to be slow. What can I do? This matter won't take Xiao'er down. At most, he will just be impeached for governance negligence. You, however, showed your true colors before him this time. Even if you move up the ladder, you will not have an easy time in the future. I'm in the same boat with your excellency, the Assistant Minister of the Court of Judicial Review. If I'm having a hard time, Shen Zichuan looked back and said with a smile, then do you think you can rest easy? I heard that there is a kind of mad dog ruthless enough to bite one of its own. Xue Xiuzhua dried his palms in the air and looked at Shen Zichuan. Being on the same boat with someone who uses others as stepping stones, this unreservedly will, instead, strike fear in one's heart. How can you say that? Shen Zichuan said, the ones who gain the upper hand tonight are all my brothers. Am I not the scapegoat before Xiao'er who takes the fall for everyone? I'll be a thorn in Xiao'er's flesh in the future. He ought to hate me to death right now. The friendship between His Majesty and Xiao'er runs deep. His act of saving His Majesty's life at the Nanlin hunting grounds is the hardest to forget. Even if you stand out this time, you might not necessarily be able to top and replace Xiao'er. The first step is always the hardest. Shen Zichuan smiled. If His Majesty truly is grateful to Xiao'er for saving his life, then he wouldn't continue to keep him trapped in Kudu. The so-called gratitude of man is only worth so much. Xue Xiuzhua wiped his hands and laughed for a moment before he said, although there was a slight deviation in our plan tonight, it was, nevertheless, still a success. Your Honor the Judge, 7 please be sure to look out for me in the future. The Judge of the Imperial Bodyguards was a 5th grade 8 official post. By this, Xue Xiuzhua was telling Shen Zichuan how much he could get during the conferment of reward in the days to come. Shen Zichuan was not surprised. He said, "The people from the Imperial Food Service are going to stand trial. The Minister of Justice, Kong Chiu, is an impartial and incorruptible official. All of you better not buckle under his interrogations. Since we dared to do it, then we aren't afraid of them investigating." Xue Xiuzhua tidied up his sleeves and said courteously, "I hope we can continue to work together in the new year. May we soon get what our hearts desire. I'm indebted to Your Excellency the Assistant Minister for looking after me." Shen Zichuan stared at him and said genially, "No doubt I will fulfill this long-cherished wish."